Welcome to our TV studio here at Baku at COP29. We're in the middle of things here in the media center, very close to the negotiation rooms in the plenary session.
Today we'll talk about exponential transition plans for net zero businesses, try to find the blueprint for green mobile networks, and hear about positive tipping stories on energy and transport.
And just in a few minutes, we'll be introducing some very interesting guests here in our studio. But first, I'd like to turn to Ingmar Renshaug, CEO and co-founder of We Don't Have Time. You've been pushing a campaign called BuyMoreTime. Please tell us a bit about this.
Yes, so we are a kind of late-stage climate crisis here. And we have heard for many, many years at those COP meetings that we need to halve the emission before the year 2030. That was kind of a hopeful message when we were in Glasgow in the beginning of I think it was 2021, but now we are soon 2025, and we have not even begun to decrease the emission. It's kind of started flat out globally. So time is running out, and we, in order to stay under 1.5 degree and don't pass it too much, we need to focus on things that can get very, very fast results. And that's the BuyMoreTime initiative all about. There's actually a solution that can bring down the temperature up to 0.5 degrees in just some years, starting to do that. And that is if we stop emitting short-lived climate gases, like methane and others. The difference between short-lived climate gases and long-lived climate gases like carbon dioxide is that it's only up in the atmosphere for a couple of years instead of up to 1,000 years. That means that we don't need to remove it in order to get it out from the atmosphere. We just need to stop releasing it. And I just heard previous today an incredibly interesting keynote of former Vice President Al Gore, where he and a lot of other partners have launched a data initiative where we now can see emissions all around the world, exactly where they are, and we know where to, stop emitting, including carbon dioxide, methane, and others. So we will have the data. Now you need the political will. So if you go to wedon'time.org/BuyMoreTime, you can read more about it, and you can contribute and sign up if you like it.
Well, this is really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
Nick?
it's exciting. There is this whole network now building, isn't there, of traceability, accountability, satellites, handheld stuff. Incredible. So it really is nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, as that song said, by somebody.
And Ingmar, you delivered a very strong speech about methane at the Tech Arena event in Stockholm recently. Let's watch this.
This is the climate crisis today. We're kind of leaning backwards. And the more emission we put up there, the more we're leaning it. But we can still do this, right? The problem, if we pass 1.5 degree, and we're very near, we're kind of there, but if we stay there and we just keep going up, there is a big, big risk of hitting a tipping point. And when we hit a tipping point, this share will be very, very hard to put back up. So this is what we must avoid for the climate. And we have a cure for this. The only thing we need in order to make it is more time. We need to buy more time. And now we feel the resistance from the politicians. But when we're up here, they will not resist the green transition because the green transition are the majority. So the policy will change when the technology changes, but we need more time. So how can we get more time? The problem with carbon dioxide, when we emit it, it will go up. And it will stay up there for up to 1,000 years. Maybe we can kind of try to remove it, but it looks kind of hard to do it, very expensive. Methane is another greenhouse gas. It's a very common greenhouse gas. It's the second biggest contributor to global warming. And there's a big difference between methane and carbon dioxide. When we release this, it comes down again. On average 12 years. It's a big difference between 1,000 years, 12 years. So the solution here is that we need to stop emit methane. And if we do that, we can actually reverse global warming with up to 0.5 degrees. That is the time we need to do everything else, because we still need to stop the carbon dioxide. So this is great news. And where does this methane come from? This is one of the sources. Bananas. Waste, food waste. 20% of methane emission comes from waste. But guess what? When I arrived here this morning, I took the bus, and the bus in Sweden, in Stockholm, are powered with bioenergy. We don't emit hardly any methane from waste. So other countries can do the same. 45% from methane comes from the fossil fuel industry. And this is a lot of emission that is really easy to fix. It's just fix the pipe. Cows are burping 4 times every 5 minutes. Agriculture adds up to 40% of the methane emissions. Many companies working on this, where you have a food additive, and you give that to the cows, and they burp up to 80% less. So what do we need? We need to look at the fridge. All the fridges we had when I was a kid were powered by a dangerous gas. And when that was released up in the air, it was destroying the ozone layer. If we hadn't fixed it, we will not be able to walk outside today and show naked skin. But we're not doing that, because the industry, the manufacturers of the fridges, the chemical companies, and bold world leaders met in Montreal, where they decided to ban freons, phase it out, put the funding behind it, and today we have perfectly fresh food and we don't use freon anymore. Isn't it great? It saved humanity once, so we can do it twice. And there is one more thing. This year, in Mars, there was a new satellite launched that is called the Methane satellite. And it will measure open data where we have emission from methane, leakage, and we will know exactly where we need to fix the problem. We don't have that for any other climate gases, but we have it for methane. So a legal system, some funding, and the data is everything we need. And this is what BuyMoreTime is all about. We can do this.
So hello again, and back to Baku here in wonderful Azerbaijan on the Caspian Sea. We're doing our daily methane show, our BuyMoreTime show here right now, and we've got some wonderful guests to talk about this. And we've already had several episodes. If you've been watching, We Don't Have Time during the week. We've looked at the oil and gas industry, what it needs to do to clean up its act in terms of methane and whether that's possible. We've looked at regulation from the perspective of Nigeria, but also from the EU and others, and we've generally been digging into this as much as we can. But there's a kind of dirty secret about methane, because most people talk about waste and landfill tips, so that's one area where the methane comes from, oil and gas industry, of course, and agriculture. But coal mines are also leaking methane, and they're often not really talked about with quite the same, maybe, urgency as the other sectors that are a bit more common when we discuss the methane story. Today we're going to spotlight coal mine methane. And these are the guests I have to talk about it. Let me first introduce Chris Wright. He's a climate strategy advisor with Ember, which is a really top consultancy. And they have been involved in a couple of really interesting reports on coal methane. We have from London, on the magic of Zoom, Dan Barry. He's the CEO of Peak Carbon, and they're a company that actually destroys methane coming out of coal mines, and we want to hear what's happening with his work. And also, by the magic of Zoom, coming from almost the other side of the world, if not the other side of the moon, is Dorothy Mai, who's project manager of the Global Energy Monitor, and they have a section within that which is looking at methane emissions. So I'm going to turn to Chris first. Hi, Chris.
How you doing?
Great to see you. You're a climate strategy advisor at Ember, and I wondered if you could give us a kind of perspective on this whole story of the methane from the coal mines. I think you have some numbers, perhaps, and also just reveal to the audience how much, or how little, but probably how much, of a problem this actually is.
Well, it's a bit of a problem. It depends where you come from, though. If you're a coal mining country, you probably don't think it's a big problem. If you're the rest of us, then you're dealing with it. So what happens with coal mines is that methane gets embedded into the coal underground. As soon as you start digging that hole and start releasing that coal, you're releasing the methane at the same time. This is a process that's not always straightforward, though. In Australia, some of these coal mines are 40 kilometers long. You can run a marathon across them, and they might be similarly wide. So you've got methane coming out over a really, really large space, and it might not be as concentrated as you would get in a gas well, but as you'd also get in an underground mine. And there's still a lot of underground mines around the world. They're doing the biggest share of emissions in terms of methane, but there is a lot of production coming from these open cut mines as well. One of the challenges there is those open cut mines are really hard to measure. It's really hard to get measuring equipment that is cost effective to cover this massive expanse of potential diffusion of methane. And so some of the estimates for that are kind of using guesswork that's really well intentioned and it's got a lot of complicated models behind it, but it's still guesswork. So when you ask about kind of what's the global figures, every year the UN asks countries to put together inventories and send them in. And right now the UN figure for coal mine methane is about 30 million tons of methane. Now, as your viewers know, methane gets multiplied a couple of times when you're trying to convert it to CO2e. But basically, of the methane, they're at about 30. When you then get independent studies of how much methane there could be, of which GEM does amazing work as well, those numbers range from about 38 to 67 million tons. So about 2x what the nationally reported estimates are. And that creates a massive amount of uncertainty. Now, if we're at that 67 million ton range, maybe the intention to deal with it would be greater. When we're at that 30 million ton range, and a big chunk of that comes from China as well as other coal mining countries, there's less of that push, I guess. So getting that measurement right is really important, and because so much of the world's coal mines are these big surface mines, there's not a lot of confidence in some of that measurement accuracy.
Right. So we're in uncertainty. There's clearly a significant amount of methane coming out. And if we care about the Paris Agreement targets, about halving emissions by 2030, then coal mine methane needs to be included. But we need to have a good handle on this so that governments can act and the private sector can act to actually do it, hopefully because they want to do it, rather than they're completely tied and bound up and dragged off to do it. So, okay, let's just stay with us because we can go further with this. Dorothy, you're coming in from the west coast of the United States, where it must be very early in the morning. So thank you so much for being awake. And tell us a little bit about the Global Energy Monitor in terms of methane. What kind of things are you finding from your research?
Sure. So currently my work at GEM mainly involves in the Global Coal Mine Tracker. It's a project we collect, analyze, and publish open source status on coal mines, including the estimates of methane emissions from both active mines, as well as some proposed mine projects. So coal mine methane, from in our current group estimates for coal mine methane It's mainly for from X. X is much higher than the estimates from the IEA. This is mainly because of the the differences of methodology we're using, and like calculating and estimating the methane emissions from individual mines just very complex. Just it's a very complex process because methane emissions can vary widely. Due to different, depending on different factors like gas content, mine depth, and coal types, production volume. As Chris has just mentioned, that China is the single largest methane emitters in the world, mainly because it has so many underground type of mines, and the production volume is just incomparable. And so generally, like deeper mines hold more methane because of underground pressure, and underground mines release more methane than surface mines. And in our calculation, the underground 80% of over 90% of the methane emissions are from the underground mines. And surface mines, they do release methane, but it's compared with the underground mines, it's just very small. However, as more and more large scale surface mines are developed, under development, it is we estimate that the scale of the methane emission from those large underground mines will increase accordingly. Yeah,
Okay.
so this is just about coal mine methane from the operating mines, and the abandoned mines is another thing that we are trying to track. In our coal mine tracker, but we haven't had any estimates on those, mainly because of the lack of the global data. So it's like when active coal mines still remains the primary focus in terms of the mitigation efforts, but abandoned coal mines could be another concern in the long run, but it's largely under recognized still. And just yes.
I think that's good, Dorothy. Yeah, I mean, orphan coal mines obviously are an issue too, as you rightly point out. A bit like orphaned oil and gas wells. Again, they don't really get that much attention. A bit like currently coal mining, methane doesn't get as much attention, perhaps, in these kind of international conferences. So, I mean, probably what I would say, I mean, to all three before I introduce our next wonderful guest is, I suppose. Many people hold the position that we shouldn't be coal mining at all if we want to save the world from climate change. But if we are going to still have mines operating, hopefully on a decreasing number in the world, so we can actually achieve the goals of keeping a safe, climate safe world, we might as well also do something with the methane. And obviously when they do get abandoned, the methane has to be handled as well in a sensible way, so it doesn't cause more problems than whatever. So, good points. Okay, so let's just go over to our next guest, which is Dan Barry, who's the CEO of Peak Carbon. You're based in London, Dan, and one of your jobs is to basically destroy methane coming from coal mines, right? So that it's less polluting and less of a climate problem. How is that going? Is there any interest in destroying methane coming from coal mines?
Yes, absolutely. So your colleague makes a very valid point, which is this is all about buying time as the world sort of solves its addiction to different types of coal for different use cases. There's a lot we can do in the interim, which is reduce the methane, which has such short-term global warming impact. And thankfully, there are technologies that have been around since the early 80s called regenerative thermal oxidizers, which you can quite easily deploy at least underground coal mines on the surface, capture the methane that is coming out of these coal mines and oxidize it you convert the methane into CO2. So unfortunately, there is still CO2 going up into the atmosphere, but that's an awful lot better than methane going up into the atmosphere. You know, by some estimates, you know, as much as 100 times less damaging over a very short term in terms of radiative forces. So the other advantage is this is one of the lowest cost abatement options that probably almost most countries have available to them. You know, these projects tend to be able to be financeable at carbon prices in the order of 20 to 30 US dollars per ton, perhaps even lower for very, very dirty mines. Obviously, the higher the concentration of methane coming out, the more carbon dioxide equivalent you're saving by implementing this technology. But the key thing is there is no revenue stream from this project other than the incentive that a carbon pricing regime puts upon that project. So in countries like Australia, where we have now got the safeguard mechanism, or in the US, where we have the Western Climate Initiative, there is a carbon price in effect. That means whether it's the coal mines or third parties that are implementing the projects for the coal mines, they are now incentivized by either saving money against their liability under the carbon price or making money by creating some sort of carbon credit to implement these projects.
Right.
Whereas jurisdictions which have no carbon pricing, there is no power generation or some other revenue stream that makes these projects economically viable. You need a carbon price to make these projects happen.
And Dan, just briefly, why can't you capture the methane from the coal mines like they can do with the oil and gas industry and have a fuel, a revenue stream?
So the key thing is when you mine coal, as Dorothy alluded to, the coal seam is full of gas, and when you mine the seam, you can hear the gas hissing out. In an enclosed space, if that gas reaches 5% or above concentration, it becomes explosive. So that's when you have horrible coal mining accidents. So one of the key safety features of underground coal mines is you blow large volumes of air through the mine shaft and keep the methane diluted to 1% or below, ideally. And of course, at those concentrations, it's too low to capture it or utilize it for anything particular. If you're looking to generate power, you tend to be up in like the 40 to 50% concentrations, or potentially even higher if you want to concentrate it into something like compressed natural gas or some sort of use case.
Okay. Good. That explains that for the audience. So let's just have a look. We've got about 15 minutes left. Let's just try and dig into this a bit. So here at the COP in COP29 in Baku, there is some movement on coal mines. I mean, it's not just here, but in the run-up to it as well. So we've got the US and China working together on all the super pollutants. And I see that it's not that long ago, and it was reiterated again here by the Chinese delegation that indeed, they are going to try and act on the methane coming from their coal mines. So that's positive. Obviously, Australia, as Dan was referring to, have a price on methane, so that there's a chance to actually have a revenue stream, so that it encourages companies to come in and destroy the methane. Is there any other action elsewhere in the world that we can see? I see the EU. Actually, I had the EU on the stage yesterday, I think it was. They say coal mines are covered in the for methane in the EU. So could it be that all these methane regulations that are now coming around the world, Nigeria's got some, I think Kazakhstan is soon getting them, blah, 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 could incorporate coal mine methane in? Would that be a good start?
That would be a great start, and that's already happening in many places. So the EU methane regulations have coal mines front and center, thermal coal mines at least. The Polish asked for the metallurgical coal mines to have a nice little exclusion there, but thermal coal mines are front and center of that regulation, and that ties in with the CBAM effect as well. So that's going to impact future imports into Europe, of which Australia is a big importer as well.
Right.
So those trade regulations can have a big role there. The safeguard mechanism in Australia has a big role. It's not a methane focus per se, it's CO2e across the economy.
So carbon dioxide equivalent, so you have to multiply, but I understand.
And for a coal mine, for an underground coal mine in particular, methane's a big problem there. So that type of mechanism can have an indirect, really big incentive push on those type of mines. And you've also got private sector kind of companies taking the lead. Anglo American in Australia was doing a massive amount of methane utilization from its mines, where it was getting the methane out of the mines before they started doing the mining, before kind of what Neil was saying, his technology needs to come in and take care of the methane that's coming out during the mining. So there is a lot of progress there. The problem is it doesn't have that kind of front line of regulations that's really driving it forward. And the coal mining sector is making a lot of money with the way things are. And as Neil highlighted, if they had to kind of start dealing... Dan, sorry.
It's all right. His mate's called Neil.
Yeah,
so
no, I've probably spent too long with his mate. But as Dan highlighted, if you don't have that incentive structure and that regulatory push, we haven't seen a track record of enough companies stepping up and saying, we want to go ahead and do this. And that's private sector companies or publicly owned entities. Though, in a place like China, you can have that opportunity of really good regulations transforming the entire industry.
Yeah. And I think that, just briefly, I mean, I think when the EU, the chap who was here from the EU was saying that the initial thing with their methane regulations on everything, not just coal mine methane emissions, is that they would like to encourage people to adopt higher standards and remove the methane before the coal is shipped, as it were. But that over time there will be some sticks coming if people don't play by the rules. I'm going to come to you in 2 seconds, Dan. I just want to go back to Dorothy, just to say, so I understand the uncertainties of the methane coming from the coal mines, both operating and orphaned or abandoned. But don't you think with, I mean, we had Al Gore here speaking last night, and actually we got a big, I think it's either tonight or tomorrow we're going to give his full speech, something called Carbon Tracer that they've developed, which can spot emissions of loads of greenhouse gases in ways one could never dream of. I suppose also supplemented by the new methane satellite. There's a European Union satellite, I think, and there are legions of NGOs and stuff with handheld sensors. So do you think with the new monitoring that's coming through that we might get a better handle on what exactly is going on with methane from coal mines?
Absolutely. I think that, advancement in the satellite and remote sensing technology could definitely help us get better understanding of the scale of the methane problem, and also improve our ability to estimate the methane emissions, regionally over time. This is a really, exciting, development. However, I think we are still at an infant stage, and the target measurement campaigns have been mainly concentrated in some countries, in certain countries like the U.S. and the European countries, where methane data is more comprehensive. But for some other countries, like the really large emitters like China, Russia, India, they have far less reliable data, and which could add uncertainty still to their actual emission levels.
So we need to urge those countries to move quickly to get a better handle on their emissions and report more honest emissions into the UN process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We also have a tracker called Global Methane Emitter Tracker. So we're trying to add we're trying to add the plume data, that we tracked from using, so for example, through the carbon mapper, and the coal mine methane polluter. The plume data of coal mine methane, it's just very, very limited. And compared with the oil and gas sector, the coal mine methane plume data is very small.
Okay, great. Okay, then back to you, Dan. Yeah.
I just want to sort of reflect on your comment, which we talked about a little bit of green shoots about methane regulation, but I would say my observations, it still gets such a free pass globally. The EU ETS really only covers CO2 emissions, The UK ETS only really covers CO2 emissions. The Western Climate Initiative only covers CO2 emissions. Australia is pretty much the only major regime I can think of that includes methane as one of its covered gases. The Chinese ETS, I believe, is CO2 only. You are starting to have some direct methane regulation that's being imposed, as you alluded to, in the EU. But the problem when you go down the command and control route rather than sort of the incentive mechanisms is more often than not sometimes the criteria or benchmarks that end up getting negotiated between industries have plenty of wiggle room such that actually it takes quite a long time before these things actually bite. And I could see Chris chuckling to himself there because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. And when methane is such an immediate issue, like it is 100 times more damaging over like a 10-year period or 20-year period, slightly less, that, why take routes which take 5 years before they start to bite? Why not just start chucking this in with the existing regulatory infrastructure we have and start creating the incentives, not just sticks like you say, but carrots for coal mines to go after some of this stuff and make good business out of something environmental.
But don't you think it's possible, I don't mean today, but maybe in 3 or 4 years' time, that if the companies, I mean, in the coal sector, but also the oil and gas sector, aren't actually provably reducing their methane emissions, that something like the EU could start bringing in penalties against countries or companies wanting to ship coal that is not methane abated? In other words, wouldn't that provide some economic incentive for them to destroy that methane in those coal mines if they feel their product cannot be sold? Or maybe the EU market's too small for that to really matter. I don't know. This gets into markets and economics. But do you think regulation could, if it has some teeth, have an impact? Or should it have teeth and be backed up by a proper emissions trading scheme?
So my point of view is that often when you introduce these teeth-like mechanisms, which are like I call more command and control type mechanisms, they tend to, because they are so sort of definitive, they tend to have a slightly longer phase-in times. And be also a little bit more room on the criteria of what's good, deemed sort of good and bad. Whereas if you introduce stuff into market-based mechanisms, actually you make it much more incentive-based than necessarily penalty-based. That some of these coal mines, are sitting on, they could turn methane abatement into something valuable for the coal mine. And I know a lot of people vilify coal mines and would hate to see them making more money, but if it's the sake of having an incredibly large and good environmental benefit impact, why is that necessarily such a bad thing?
Okay, we can't solve the whole problem today. We're obviously close. There's 3 clever people there and me as the moderator, but we can't fully solve it today. We literally got 1 minute left. So your call, Dan, would be for governments to bring in carbon markets that reflect methane in their economies. Okay. Dorothy, you think that there needs to be obviously stepped up monitoring, that you feel that the new systems might be useful, but they might not be the full banana, that we might need something else to get it right. And Chris, you started. Any last point that you want to make?
Well, one of the opportunities, like Neil's talking about, get it running, destroying methane within maybe 18 months. So if you did get those incentives right, if you did get those regulations right, you could start destroying that methane maybe by next year's COP. And that could really be some progress. But one of the challenges is with the way that coal mining is done around the world, there might not be mitigation options for every coal mine. And that means we need to talk about phasing down, maybe even phasing out coal mining over a period of time that doesn't absolutely destroy economic production. And we need to start having that conversation a lot more seriously.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much, both our guests from Zoom, Dorothy and Dan. Give our best to Neil as well. And Chris, thank you very much. Did a great job. And we'll see you later. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure what we are. I thought it was getting serious, but then he posted this story like 5 minutes ago.
Weird.
That's so toxic. Like, who is she? Is she one of his friends? He's never mentioned her. Who is she?
I don't feel so good.
It has indeed been a turbulent start of COP29 with the diplomatic fallout between the host country and France, and also with Argentina pulling back its delegation. But none of this really affects the challenge we have and the fact that we are threatening to transgress even more of the planetary boundaries. And this is what we're going to talk about in this session. Exponential transition plans for net zero business is brought to you by this Exponential Roadmap initiative in this session. And these plans, they imagine a world which we have not broken any more planetary boundaries, and in a world where humans and also businesses still can thrive. So we'll talk about how transition plans can guide us and guide companies in their transformation towards a business that is compatible with this net zero operating space that we need to focus on. But before we move on into a panel discussion, let's look at how dangerously close we are to transgressing more planetary boundaries. This is a reminder that science shows that there are 9 systems and processes that are called the planetary boundaries. And they, of course, contribute to the state of balance that the planet needs to be in to support its functions. So let's now turn to Anders Leverman. He's professor for climate dynamics at the Potsdam Institute for Impact Research. So wonderful to have you join us.
Yes, hello.
How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
Excellent. So Anders, please tell us, what is the state of our planet's health?
Well, we have, as you mentioned, 9 planetary boundaries that we have identified and that we are transgressing at a rapid speed. 6 of these have been transgressed already, and one of them is the climate system. Now, the climate system is complex, and we are very often focusing on the tipping points of the climate system, which are large-scale regions and processes that if we bring them to a tipping point, they will change their quality dramatically. For example, the Greenland ice sheet, the Antarctic ice sheet, and especially the Western Arctic ice sheet, but also parts of the Eastern Arctic ice sheets, the Amazon rainforest, and so on and so forth. We will be seeing a complete melt of the Arctic ice in summer in about 20 years. Coral reefs are dying everywhere on the planet, but the big important thing, especially for businesses, are the weather extremes. We see from the statistics as weather extremes increase exponentially. We understand this statistically, but also physically. If you consider the bell curve of, for example, the heat in a specific region or country, then you can imagine that if you increase the temperature by only a little bit, the bell curve shifts, and the extremes at the end of the heat side of this curve increase quadratic exponentially. We've seen this in Europe. We've seen this everywhere on the planet. So we understand the mechanism behind this exponential growth. With respect to floods, we've just seen tremendous floods in Spain, but over the last summer there have been floods in Brazil and all around the planet, really. This is also deeply footed in physics, because we know the Clausius-Clapeyron equation of 1834, which tells us that a warm atmosphere can hold more water vapor. And this is exactly how extreme rainfall events increase exponentially. 7% more intense for every degree of warming, 17% more frequent for every degree of warming, which means that we have just seen about 1.5 degrees of global warming worldwide, which means that on land this has been basically double, which means that 17% per degree of warming translates into 60% higher frequency of extreme rainfall events. And this is what we see everywhere on the planet. The jet stream is meandering more and more and is causing more dynamic extreme events all around the planet. And this kind of fireworks will bring our societies, our economies to the verge of collapse. And this is not a physical tipping point, but a societal one, the one that we have to worry about most.
Thank you very much, Anders. So in terms of cost, you mentioned this, in terms of cost, if we look at the business perspective, if we stay on this trajectory, what will this cost by the turn of the century?
Because of the inertia in the climate system, we have basically locked in the temperature evolution of the next 20 years. This is depressing, but it doesn't mean that we can't do anything. We're not allowed to do. We're not allowed to stop doing something, obviously, because whatever happens after the 20 years is in our hands right now. And since carbon dioxide that is coming from fossil fuels, from oil, gas, and coal, is staying in the atmosphere basically for forever, that means we can only stabilize the temperature of the planet if we go to zero carbon emissions. Now, if we don't do that, we'll increase the pressure on the economy. It's not the only impact of climate change. Obviously, we have enormous impacts on nature and society and human well-being beyond the economic costs. But recent studies, starting from Stanford University studies in 2015, but then we have added a few in Nature in the last 2 years, have shown that in the past, weather changes, that is temperature variability, but also just annually higher temperatures, the annually higher rainfall, more rainy days, more extreme rainfall events, but also deviations of the rainfall from what we are used to in a season. All of these have impacts on the economic growth. And that is different from the disruption that we see when extreme weather events destroy something. In rich countries, this destruction is then being repaired, and it's generally or very often a positive signal in the GDP. As perverted as this might be, this is the way we measure economic activity. But what we found in the past 40 years to be true is that there has been an impact from weather on economic growth. And this is important because it is transported from one year to the other, and any damage that you cause there is increasing over time exponentially. So we find that in the next 25 years, we'll have a decrease of economic growth by 20% compared to a world without climate change due to the climate change that we have already caused. This is about 6 times larger than the current estimates of the mitigation costs that we have in the next 20 years, which makes the Paris Climate Agreement not only a politically sensible agreement, but also the economically sensible one, because reducing climate change is fundamental for the well-being of the world economy.
Well, thank you very much indeed for setting the stage here and for explaining this, the profound impact this trajectory we are on, that it has on our economy and for our businesses, apart from humanity as a whole. So thank you very much, Anders, for staying with us here and sharing your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Now it's my pleasure to move into a panel and introduce the first speakers here that are in the studio with me. Great to have you here, Dr. Arnaud Barghosh, founder and CEO of the think tank Climate, Energy, Environment and Water. And also Julia Baruti, Director of Climate BSR. And with us on Zoom, we have Anna Hall. She's Head of Public Affairs, Energy Division, Alfa Laval. And also we have Claire Wigg with us, who is Head of Climate Performance Practice, Exponential Roadmap Initiative. Wonderful to have the two of you joining us on Zoom too. So we just heard about how close we are to transgressing even more planetary boundaries. But we don't really want to imagine a world like Anders stated here, where we can't be able to stop this transgression. So let's now imagine a world where we have succeeded, where we have not transgressed any more planetary boundaries, which would be a net zero world, of course. So Claire, starting with you, from the Exponential Roadmap Initiative perspective, what does a net zero world look like for business?
Yeah, thank you. Very good to be here, and nice to see everybody. So we think that business will look very different, obviously, in 2050. We've all been told for some years now about the transformations that need to take place. So most existing large companies will need to transform their supply chains, they'll need to transform their processes, their business models, their energy, of course, if we're going to get to a net zero world at all. So what we've done at Exponential Roadmap in the last year, taking inspiration from the planetary boundaries, was that we set out to describe, in terms that businesses could relate to, what we would call the net zero operating space for business. So if you think about this, it's a space that is constrained. It is constrained. We have to realize that. It's constrained by the need to get as close as possible to zero greenhouse gas emissions and to restore nature. And it's also a space in which we need to meet the needs of all the people who live on this planet in 20, 30 years' time. So from reading UNFCCC reports and from work by others on human needs and the necessary technologies and transformations we all know about, we came up with four characteristics that we think need to apply to all businesses in this net zero operating space. And they're characteristics that all climate solutions have in common. So they are circular. So all business models need to be circular, all material use needs to be circular. And optimized, that's optimized in all possible ways, which means efficient use of all resources and assets. We can't have anything sitting still and not being used. Everything's got to be in use all the time. And renewable, obviously, in terms of energy, but also in terms of materials, and then regenerative. We define regenerative as meaning that all the processes a company is engaged in give back more to the planet, to people, to nature than they take. So that's our proposal, is that net zero businesses will be circular, optimized, renewable, and regenerative. And we're talking with our companies, obviously, at Exponential Roadmap about how they move in that direction.
Well, thank you very much, Claire Wigg. Turning now to Aaron Abergosh, from an emerging economy perspective, how does these principles ring to you? What can you say about them?
I think in principle there will be agreement. I mean, one of the things with emerging economies is you're already under constraint, not just a carbon constraint or a fiscal constraint, you're on a cost of finance constraint. So efficiency of resources has to be part of your business model if you want to survive in an emerging market, let alone break through into a developed country as an export market. But I think there are now conscious efforts happening towards circular economy. We take India's new critical minerals mission. It's as much about digging up new mines as it is about actually the circular economy of minerals and materials. If you look at the optimization of resources that Claire was talking about, again, the way we are modeling out the growth of our renewables power in the power sector, the optimized role of solar and wind in a combined way actually helps you to transition away from fossil fuels faster than if you went down individual solar or wind or battery pathways. Of course, for emerging economies, the renewable story is also a leapfrog opportunity. Nearly 90% of additional electricity demand in the world will come from emerging markets. So here's an opportunity where you can see that the costs for renewables plus storage, for instance, is cheaper than coal or gas. You automatically get into the renewables-based ecosystem. The regenerative part is interesting because I don't think we have, let alone emerging markets, I don't think we anywhere at scale we have cracked the business models which then become investable financial models for regenerative processes at scale. Yes, there's a lot of regenerative agriculture happening. India is the largest such program in the world. Indonesia is doing things, etc. But when we talk about regenerative from, bioplastics, we're talking about regenerative from the point of view of, valuing nature so that, the value of the tree is, and the value of the soil from which the tree is growing is greater than the value of the chopped wood. All that requires very different approaches towards the business and the financial models that help you scale up.
Thank you very much. So Julia Baruti, from the BSR perspective, what could you say about the principles that Claire Wigg stated here for net zero world for business?
Thanks much for the question, and thanks for having us as well. It's a pleasure. And well, the first thing I'll say is that I could not agree more with what Claire put forward. We also work with businesses, and we've explored these topics in the past year and a half as well with them. And all of this comes from the recognition that some of the businesses that have targets, they are not on the track to reach them. And so they are looking for ways to actually stay within this net zero operating space. So some of the key elements that I want to share here are first on the principles themselves. From what we put forward in terms of ideas, I really agree with the circular, regenerative and renewable that Claire put together. Mm-hmm. One thing that we have started to explore is also the principle of sufficiency, which is really looking at what we need to stay within the planetary boundaries rather than thinking about what we want.
Sufficiency.
So that's one. And the other one is, to me, the just transition principle to us should stay really at the core. There are just transition implications of changing business models, for example. One very concrete example, in a couple of years ago, we did a study on the apparel supply chain and the implication of moving to circularity there in terms of social impacts. And there are plenty, of course, in terms of jobs losses and things like that. And so we need to embed the principle of the just transition into there. And for us, this is very important. The other two things I want to say is, one, of course, businesses need to shift and transform. They operate within an environment that needs to be enabling. So the importance of policy and how finance thinks about this topic and keeping us within planetary boundaries is fundamental, and we need to think about that. And the other idea that through the conversation we had with companies and the work that we published, we explore is also this idea which of course is underlying of the mindset shift. There is no question about that. We need to move from the incremental to the exponential or transformational change, and this is something which maybe sustainability teams within companies understand very well, but it's a very difficult conversation to have within a company with other departments, and so there's a lot to be done in that space as well to achieve that net zero operating space.
Thank you very much, Julio. Turning now to Anna Hall from Alfa Laval. 2050 in a net zero world, I mean, it might sound like it's very far away time-wise, but it's not really. So what good examples can you give from a company perspective to plan ahead and to be able to make this transition?
I think planning is, A and O, so to say. I think to reach the net zero 2050 goals, we need to have swift short-term goals as well. So Alfa Laval is determined to be by 2030 already carbon neutral in scope 1 and 2, and have a 50% of carbon emission or emission reduction in scope 3. And then in 2050, net zero in all scopes. And for us, it's super important because then we can do hands-on targets that is actionable here and now. So we work hard with scope 1, of course, how we use our energy and our resources within our premises. We use reusing the energy with heat pumps here in Lund in their headquarters, reusing energy from the production processes and then enabling us to heat our headquarter office and production facilities up to 90%. And also we work hard with, of course, electrification of transportation and of our own processes. And then in scope 2, we're already above 90% of renewables in the energy we use. And scope 3, we absolutely believe that we need to collaborate over the value chains. So helping our customers, of course, implementing energy efficiency in their processes. We know 40% of the Paris Agreement comes from energy efficiency. And in last year's COP, we agreed upon doubling energy efficiency implementation. And actually, the yearly capacity, over 100 or millions of heat exchangers that we both install and serve, we decrease the energy consumption by 100 gigawatts and the carbon emission by 50 million tons, equals the whole emission of Sweden, if we just want to do a comparison. And so that is vital to us to walk the walk and to hold our customers in hand, and then also hold our suppliers in hand. So we work hard with activating the demand for innovative solutions. For example, circular models, reusing our all the materials in our production, but also to look into, for example, fossil-free steel, low-emission steel. So now we just implement low-emission steel in one of our products, a whole new product line, and actually we can reduce the carbon footprint on this product with up to 40%, which I think is tremendous, through collaboration and partnership across the value chain.
So 40% reduction, that's quite impressive in this product. So Anna, in terms of reconciling profitability and sustainability, how are you finding this? Because many businesses do struggle with this perspective.
Yes, and I think it's a mind shift. For us, investing in sustainability is not a cost, it's an investment. That's super important for us. Maybe it's CapEx, OpEx constraint, but we always come back to that it's an investment. It's about how to be, of course, work with energy efficiency in our own processes, process optimization, and cost reduction, waste reduction, and so forth. That will bring revenues to us. But it's also about competitiveness, profitability, and growth, that we can develop new green solutions for the world that would really make a difference. And I think the only way to actually be a future-proof company, that is to work with the sustainability goals and the green transition and reduce carbon emission. And I also think that the new sustainability reporting. I know a lot of people struggling with it now in Europe, but I think it's very good because it gives us a new language, so we can have transparency and we can actually talk about measurements, and we can compare apples and apples and pears and pears. And I think that is going to be super fruitful for the future when we actually know what we're talking about hands-on and swift.
Thank you very much, Danahal. Ernabagosh, when it comes to transition plans in the business world, looking at the perspective we're sharing here, how relevant and what's happening in your country, India, when it comes to these transition plans?
I mean, we've been, of course, looking at it not just in India, but across the world. 2 years ago, I served on the Secretary General's high-level expert group on the net zero commitments of corporations. And there's the good news is that across the world, including in developing countries, over the last 2 years, of the 2,000 largest companies, there has been a 23% increase in the number of voluntary commitments towards net zero. Amongst states and regions, there's been a 28% increase. Among cities, there's an 8% increase. In my own country, my organization is working with 17 of India's 28 states.
17 out of the 28.
28 states to look at, different pathways, because, India is a country of countries, so they have heavily industrialized states and heavily agricultural states, and their pathways will differ. The bad news is that many of these plans, their targets or their voluntary commitments, but the plans require more granular analysis. From a company perspective, we see across the world that there's a very small fraction of companies that are doing what Anna was describing, right? Which is scope 1, 2, and 3, right? So it's not so much the procedural, but the substantive gaps that are there in the plans. The other challenge, when you look at companies operating in different geographies, is the longer tail of the supply chains, right? So you need the queen bee company to create the demand pull, but the supply chain entities often require access to working capital. They are worried about competitiveness within their clusters, etc. So that's again something that you need to focus on. And the third thing that needs to happen is really about establishing the near-term plan. So 2015 net zero is one thing, but what do you achieve by 2025? What do you achieve by 2030? This gives. In the past, companies have asked for that from governments to give them clear lines of sight. Now I think governments need to ask that from companies. So what are you planning to get to by 2030? What are you planning to get to by 2035? So there is a complementarity. So suppose you were a company that decided to procure a lot of renewable energy, right, for your offtake. Then the government can also accordingly plan out the grid transmission infrastructure that will also sync up in line with that demand, right? So there has to be a two-step tango here, rather than just government saying companies you do your thing and companies saying governments you do your thing.
Thank you for shedding light on this two-step tango. So a question that goes to Giulio and also to Claire here is about the transition plans connected to the business plans and related to the CSRD reporting that is now going on in Europe. So what can you say about this, the alignment here and how we can use the CS3D, or it's actually 3D, to CSRD and CS3D to really push for this alignment of the transition plans and the development of the business plans? Let's start with you, Giulio.
Yeah, happy to touch on that. Of course, there is a clear trend in terms of climate transition plan being pushed into regulations, and there are two types of regulations. You mentioned two types: the reporting and the due diligence ones. So CSRD is one of several reporting regulations that are pushing for climate transition plan disclosure. CSDDD is the only one, to my knowledge, that pushes for companies to adopt and put into practice a climate transition plan which is aligned with the Paris Agreement goal of 1.5. And that is a fundamental difference, because what's happening is that in many cases CSRD is helping, and the disclosure is helping companies in harmonizing the indicators that they look at in their climate transition plan. It helps with the harmonization of the different frameworks that exist on CTPs. But if CTPs keep on being a reporting vehicle, they are not going to be as transformational as we want them to be. And so that's where due diligence is good and different, in my opinion. The impact of CSDDD still has to be seen, because the directive was approved in 2024 and has to come into force. But I think it has a strong potential, because actually both CSRD and CSDDD talk about the business model transformation aspect of CTPs. And so if CSDDD is truly implemented in the way that it should, then we can really leverage that as a tool to achieve these net zero operating spaces we're talking about today.
Thank you. Let's hope for this indeed. Claire, Wig, what is your take on this topic?
Yeah, well, I completely agree with what Julia's just said about CSRD, which Anna mentioned as the one that everyone's panicking about, as being a reporting tool. This just states the facts. It doesn't determine the ambition level, and that's where CSDDD comes in, I think, or could come in, as Julia says. We shall wait and see. I think it's interesting that I did hear from a company on the other side of the Atlantic saying that it was CSDDD they were afraid of, rather than in terms of making them transform. And they felt they had a good motivator to their internally to make a real transformation in their climate transition plan, rather than just a tick box exercise. It was CSDDD that they were talking about. So I think that's very positive. Because what we've learned from companies is that when they work in detail, as a company like Alfa Laval has, on what their transformation could look like, and they work at a granular level, as Aranaba was saying, then transformation happens, or then invention happens. Necessity is the mother of invention. And when you get down to the level of costs and risks and things like that, which all of the business needs to understand, not just the sustainability professionals, then that's where the opportunity comes to actually plan out transformation.
Thank you very much, Claire. We've heard from many speakers here about the NDCs that countries ought to deliver next year, and that there also been some demand of companies being more in step with and pushing with the NDCs and going hand in hand. Of course, countries like Brazil and also the UK have announced that they have new target climates, and they've been announcing this already here at the COP. So Anna, what are your thoughts on how company transition planning and country transition planning can be interdependent?
I think, if we call for brave and bold NDCs, they should be actionable, localized, they should be measurable and financeable. And that's, of course, policy and legislations that has to come into place. But what we companies can contribute with is the solutions. The solutions already exist. So the governments and negotiators in COP now can be sure that we actually can implement those solutions at scale. And that's really when we need to go into the implementation phase. And I think then private sector, industries, financial bodies, insurance companies, we all need to find this financial model so we can unlock the implementation of the solutions. And I think the discussions that I've attended now here at COP this week has really been to that money exists. We need to just unlock it. And I think that is actually a very happy, fruitful discussion, that we can really achieve our goals by collaboration. So I think industry, private sector has a very important role in messaging that it's achievable, and we prepare. We all have high ambitious scientific-based targets, and we're going to contribute.
Thank you very much, Anna. I'm curious, Aruna Bargosh, what are your thoughts on this, the interdependency between the NDCs and the businesses' transition plans?
They're certainly interdependent, but interdependent in different ways. One is technology. Actually, if you look at the history of multilateral environment agreements, in many cases, those that have been successful is because business or innovators had already got the solution, and then the treaty or the regime helped to create the market to deploy that solution at scale. The Montreal Protocol is one example of that. And we know that there is a lot of continuing innovation that's happening in the clean tech space that can be given a bigger push were there a multilateral deal that gets ratcheted up over time. But in addition to that, there's another interdependency, which is about trade and investment. And that is not discussed necessarily at a COP, but that is becoming very real. For emerging markets, for instance, there is now a triple whammy that they're dealing with. The first is that there's not a problem we've created, but yes, we acknowledge since Paris Agreement that we've got to be part of the solution. Right? But the double whammy was that we want to be part of the solution, but the investment is not flowing. There's only 15% of global clean tech investment that goes to emerging markets and developing economies, excluding China. So you can set out the policies, but the investment isn't coming. And the third, the triple whammy that's now coming is, even if we were to do the energy transition, where is the scope for the economic transformation? This is where, if large advanced economies start using protectionist policies and just try to hoard all the kind of investment and the capex within their territories, then you don't create globally interdependent, codependent, resilient and reliable supply chains. Imagine it in a different way, where you make a component and Julio makes a component, I make a component, we all need to trade each other to make the final product. Then not only are we transitioning away from a dirty to a cleaner energy system, we're all creating a stake in the clean industrial economy of the future. This will not come just from bottom-up business. It will require top-down coordination amongst countries. So I said this in front of the Secretary General yesterday, that global collective action requires global collective coordination. And that's why this interdependency needs to be unpacked between not just business and their national governments, but a level of cross-border trade and investment reimagined.
And we do see more protectionism on the rise.
That's the worry.
That is the worry. So Julia and also Claire, in terms of your members in your organizations, your respective organizations, what is your call to action when it comes to this topic of transition plans as a tool for transformation?
Yeah, I think my simply said, maybe not simply done, call to action is to acknowledge the climate transition plan as a strategy tool, to embrace that. And we all know that the transition is not easy, but it is necessary, and so that we should embrace it and collaborate to get to it. And then my second call to action is really, as I mentioned in the beginning of this one, is really to embrace the concept of the just transition and to make it central into how you deliver transition plans. There is a risk somehow in treating climate transition plans in just climate, whereas we need to acknowledge that there are dependencies with people and with nature impacts, and we need to at least uncover them. Climate transition plan are climate and business strategies, but we need to acknowledge the trade-offs and avoid the negative ones.
Thank you, Julia. Turning now to Claire, what is your call to action to the ERI members?
Yes, well, I would put to them Julio's calls to action as well, and then I'd add one that I briefly touched on before, which is that businesses should ask them the question: how can we meet our climate and nature biodiversity targets, as well as running a profitable business? Because they need to be discussing the details of the financing and finding opportunities. And the other one is related to the discussion of interlinkages with NDCs, and we would call, as I think the report that Aranaba was involved in called for, companies to declare their dependencies, especially on governments, but especially also on colleagues in their sector and supply chain, so that these are revealed. We need them up front so that everyone can see them, everyone can read them, and then people can collaborate to make these changes happen.
Thank you very much, Claire. So Anna, from your perspective, you're already doing this. How do these call to actions ring to you?
I think it sounds good. I think we need to we need to really have the sense of urgency. It's 60 months left to 2030, and we need to halve carbon emissions. So, collaboration over the value chain is essential, and also, reveal the dependencies, and also realize the importance of policy and regulations, as well as incentives, but also implementation, action. That's what we call for.
Thank you very much, Anna. Remember, Gosh, you mentioned the meeting yesterday. I guess you were referring to the roundtable with you and Secretary General. Could you tell us a bit more about this and the call to action again from Brazil to bring more stronger NDCs and transition plans to Belém next year?
I think increasingly it's becoming evident that as we put forward the next round of NDCs, first, the need to link it to climate and nature and biodiversity, because it can't be one or the other, which goes back to some of the original principles that Claire put out. You know, it has to be regenerative, not just extractive. It has to be optimized, not just repetitive. So that's going to be important. But I think the issue of supply chains, industrial policy, energy security, these will inform the confidence with which governments can come forward with raised ambitions. Because we are no longer, and in the COP process itself, it's no longer really about setting ambition alone. It is about converting the ambition into action, but more importantly, in the context of this conversation, converting the action into accelerated action, exponential action. That's not going to happen by raising ambition alone. It's only going to, that inflection point, that S-curve, is not based on more rhetoric. It's based on getting the nuts and bolts of what is the bottleneck that I need to remove in my supply chain? What is the bottleneck that I need to remove in my investment plans? What's the bottleneck I need to remove in interconnections across borders? That kind of sort of coordinated capitalism is needed for us to move into sort of the next stage, the next level. It's kind of like those video games, right? You know, there's no point in a 100-level video game if I'm acing level 10, you know, compared to everybody else. That's no good. I have to figure out how to break through to level 11 or level 20, etc. And I think that's how we have to start thinking. And the pandemic is an interesting example. You know, you would normally take 3 years to get a vaccine, right, with clinical trials. Got a vaccine in 12 to 15 months. Of course, there was a lot of vaccine inequity, but the point is technologically you could get there because we recognized the asteroid that had already hit the planet. Now there's a different asteroid coming and hitting the planet. And could we do this just on our own? No. A lab in Oxford has to work with a plant in India to scale up, exponentially deliver the solution. That's what we need to do with decarbonization along with development.
Thank you very much, Arun Abergosh. And Julio, in terms of really leveling up, speaking of the gamification terms here, using them, what do you see if you look into the Belém meeting next year, a year from now? What kind of leveling up are you hoping for in the business community?
I think if I may cite two, I hope that's allowed. But one is around the accelerated transformation. So it's a time for implementation. I think I would echo what you said. We don't need to raise the ambition only. We really need to double down on the implementation. And so I would hope that by Belém there is progress that we can show and that we got there. And the other one is getting back to the point I made earlier about the interconnectedness of the issue. I would think that increased recognition by Belém about that interconnection is what I'm hoping for.
Thank you, Julia. And Claire, what levels have we broken through in Belém next year?
Well, I'm hoping that all the companies that don't have them will have climate transition plans by then, and that they will be sufficiently granular. And I'm also hoping that more companies will be on track. Julia mentioned earlier that a lot of companies are unfortunately not on track towards those nice ambitions that they have. So I'm hoping that we will have found some more collaborative breakthroughs, I think, so that, as Anna said, companies get their Scope 3 emissions under control.
And Anna?
Yes, we just do what we can. We are accelerating. We have a press release next week. I can't reveal the content, but stay tuned. And I think, I can only echo what has been said here, that it's about collaboration, it's about action, and it's about realizing the sense of urgency. 60 months left to 2030. We have a lot of things to do together, and let's start level up together.
Well, thank you very much, Anna. We have a few minutes to go before this session ends. Is there anything that we have forgotten to discuss that you would like to bring to the table? Let's start with you, Aaron Arba.
I think what we've not talked about explicitly, it's been implicit in our conversation, especially Julia has brought up just transition, is people. You know, this will not work if people don't believe that they are the agents of change rather than they are just the recipients of something far removed that is being done to govern their destinies. I say this particularly because this has been the most democratic year in human history, the number of elections that have happened.
It's true that.
And some have gone some ways and some have gone other ways. And that's not the point. The point is, until we give away our destinies to AI, we are in charge of our destinies. And we've got to understand that the economic agent by day is a citizen by night. And we've got to bring people more explicitly into that conversation about transitions, about leveling up, about a different way of radical collaboration.
Thank you. Beautifully put. And I'm not sure that I completely like this phrase, when we hand over to the AI, but well, we'll leave it at that. Would you like to add anything, Julia?
I think we touched on a lot of topics. I will just underscore, when we talked about the CSTDD component, I think that provides a very good opportunity to de-silo some of the work that's been going on in sustainability with the human rights field, with us climate and nature professionals. And I think we should jump on that wagon and embrace it as companies.
Thank you. It's all interconnected, huh? Yeah. So, Claire and Anna, one last round.
Yes,
anything you'd like to add? Yeah.
Following on from Julia there, yes, I've been hearing people talk recently about the way that you can actually find synergies in your actions and strategy, which will deal with different aspects of the sustainable development goals, and therefore come away from this idea that there are trade-offs. And I think we need to move towards a language of there being synergies rather than trade-offs within company action and country action. So that would be nice to see.
Thank you. And Anna, you get the last word here.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. It's about people. I think also we jointly have to bring the good examples who actually succeed. I'm a mother of 4, and I keep telling my kids all the good examples I find every day to see that actually we're taking one step at a time. Because it's so easy to see the big picture and get a little bit depressed. But we have a responsibility to next generation and to our own generation, to the people we live with on this planet, to bring up the good examples and, I mean, really point out how we can level up together.
Excellent. Well, let's finish this by the word saying level up. I mean, that's excellent. It's gamification, and maybe that's a good way of looking at it, even if it's much more than a game. So thank you very much for joining us here, Aaron Abergosh, and also Julio, of course, and Anna and Claire. It's been wonderful to have this conversation with you, and this has been brought to you by Exponential Roadmap Initiative that really works very focused on this topic. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
As the countdown to 2030 accelerates, the pressure mounts for mobile networks operators not only to reduce their own emissions, but to redefine their role in the fight against climate change. With just 5 years left to reach key sustainability targets, are operators moving fast enough? We're going to talk about this in this session. And what bold steps are required to halve their emissions by 2030 and make a real impact? My name is Katarina Rolfsdotter Jansson, and I'll be talking to you today in this session as organized by GSMA, the Mobile Industry Association. Well, first, we'll have a fantastic panel that will take us through our questions. But first, before the panel, let's shed some light on the situation. And I'd like to give the scene to Stephen Moore, you're head of climate action at GSMA. So please, you have a keynote prepared for us, so you have our full attention, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Katarina. It's great to be with you here today. So give an overview of climate action in the mobile sector, maybe just going back to 2019, when the board of the GSMA, that's the Mobile Industry Association, sets an ambition for the whole of the industry to be net zero by 2050. And this ambition was actually ahead of any G7 country. Fast forward to where we are this year, and we actually see 80% of the industry by global mobile connections are publicly reporting their carbon emissions each year. So there's been fantastic progress on transparency. We have also seen really good progress on mobile network operators aligning their targets to 1.5 degrees. So we actually now have 70 operators all around the world that have committed to these targets and are working to achieve them. How are they doing actually though on progress? So this is something that at the GSMA we measure every year. We produce an annual mobile net zero report, and our last report showed that the emissions of networks seem to be starting to plateau, which is really good news. So what we see is for mobile networks there has been a slight increase, but this has been offset by a decrease in fixed networks, which is broadband. And how this has been achieved is through a combination of energy efficiency measures, but also switching to renewable energy as well. Renewable energy can be invested and purchased over markets, and we've seen really fantastic progress on this in Europe in particular. In other countries around the world, though, it is a little bit more tricky, and this is something that we're actually calling on as the mobile industry, calling on governments to speed up the deployment of renewables, but also help create a market that enables companies to purchase renewables. We have a huge amount of demand for renewable electricity from our sector to green telco networks. We're also seeing the deployment of more on-site renewables as well, which is fantastic because this is directly displacing diesel generators, which is sometimes used to power mobile masts in remote locations. So we're seeing more things like on-site solar combined with batteries that are able to be used instead of diesel. We have seen some challenges though, particularly for supply chain emissions. So this is actually the majority of emissions from our sector. It's about 3/4 of the total emissions sits in the supply chain, and that's formed of all the things that effectively we purchase as a sector. So covers network equipment that we use both for mobile masts, but also in our data centers, and telephone exchanges. It also covers devices, mobile devices, and it also covers what we call customer premises equipment. So this is things like broadband routers that sits in people's homes. And this is very tricky to decarbonize. We need to use lots of different levers in order to reduce emissions there. Things like switching to renewables in the supply chain, but also more from the energy efficiency as well in manufacturing facilities. Also thinking about the materials we use to make these products. So moving away from kind of virgin raw materials, using more recycled content. And above all, using equipment for longer, because for a lot of this equipment, most of the emissions from the equipment actually sits in it being manufactured. So if we can use it for as long as possible, then the overall life cycle emissions of that equipment will definitely be lower. I think we can perhaps dive into some of these challenges in the panel discussion, but hopefully that gives a good overview of where we are today.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Stephen Moore. Now I'm delighted to welcome our next guest, Dr. Hyumyeon Lee. You are Head of Group Environmental Sustainability at Singtel, and you have a keynote presentation for us, so take it away, please.
Thank you, Katarina. First of all, good day everyone who's online, and I would like to express my appreciation to the organizer for having me here. So Singtel Group is a telecom operator in Singapore. In 2023, we revalidated our net zero target, and in the process, we've also brought forward our net zero from 2050 to 2045. So today, after having our goal set, I think what I'm going to share with you is really about from pledges to action, a few key highlights that are what we are doing in order to move towards our net zero goal. So after the goal was set, what we did was we follow up with a group environmental strategy, which we call the 4D environmental sustainability strategy. They are underpinned by 4 pillars. The first one, defend our asset in order to create a more resilient network, decarbonize our operation towards a net zero network, as well as dematerialize our business operation so that we are moving towards a more circular business. We believe that with this 3 pillar well done, we are in a very good position to deliver sustainable value to our stakeholders. One of the things that we have taken care of during the development of this framework really is to make sure that we have built in 3 enablers, one relating to people, engage and equip, one relating to finance for sustainability, and the last one on corporate governance when it comes to policies and guidelines. So, yeah, next. Yes. And then, so you can see that, 3 enablers, these are the few initiatives that we have put across the 3 enablers, and let me bring you more into details. And we do this because we believe that sustainability or towards a net zero goal, it's everybody responsibility, from all the way from our senior management even to our sales associate in the store. So the first one, equip and engage, that's essentially relating to people. So what we have done is we have done 2 big initiatives. The first one is really to equip and to empower our staff with relevant sustainability knowledge. So we divide it into 3 different levels, the basic, intermediate, and advanced. What we've done is really to roll out a basic e-training module to everyone in the organization, because we believe if you don't know anything about sustainability, when you join Singtel, we would equip you with the necessary knowledge to know what the Singtel sustainability stand. And then so the second big pillar that we've done is really we created a network of advocates and champions whom we call the Singtel Champ for the environment. So they are meant to look at ground-up activities, to look at how do we create a more sustainable workplace from the way we live, and the way we work in our workplace. The second one, obviously, is finance for sustainability. We have sustainable linked loan framework since 2021, and in the last 2 years, we've worked to also bring about internal carbon pricing into our big capex investment as well as our large OPEX spend. Finally, I think this is also one of the key ones, because if we want our organization to transform into a more sustainable organization, definitely we need to make sure the way we do business, the way we run about our operation has to have the right policies and guidelines that enable everybody to move into the same direction towards the net zero goal. So in the last 2 years, we've been working a lot to refresh our environmental policy, to be more specific about climate and emissions clause, as well as we just published our climate statement that talks about affirmation of our commitment to climate action. And finally, we've also just launched a responsible procurement policy that look at not just us, but also our greater value chain to be able to decarbonize together. And then I come to my last point, which is also a very important one. It's since a few years back, we have actually tied our top executive remuneration to sustainability. So part of their remuneration in terms of their long-term incentive gets tied to how we perform from a climate perspective. And I think this one, it's one of the, I would say, good motivation that we have seen people working alongside with us. So I think with that, I will stop here as we're going to delve more into this later at the panel. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. And as a former customer of Singtel, I used to live in Singapore. I'm very impressed by this work.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. And now let's continue with a panel discussion on this important topic. And I'm now joined by Mats Pellbeck-Sharp, who is chairperson of We Don't Have Time, with a long track record and long history in the telco business. And Stephen Tallier, you'll back here, Stephen Moore. And also we are joined by Mehwish Ramzan, you are ESG manager at Jazz, and that is based here in Baku, right? It's Pakistan. Oh, sorry, then my information in my script was not correct. You're in Pakistan. I beg your pardon. So Stephen, what main challenges would you say the telcos are facing in aligning business strategies with climate goals? We talked about this in the previous session. And how are these challenges being overcome from your perspective, please?
Yeah, I think I touched upon a couple of them just in the opening. So I think one big challenge is around access to renewable energy. It's really going to help get us to the 2030 targets that we've got across the industry. So it's a really big focus, and we know that it's not just our industry that is asking for renewables, but all industries are. But we have so many willing buyers of renewables, and the frustration is that the energy markets in many countries at the moment don't allow for corporate purchase of renewables. So we really need to see a liberalization of those markets, and we've seen it start to happen. So South Africa is quite a good recent example. We've seen one of our members, Vodacom in South Africa, has been working very closely with both the government and the National Energy Company to help create a route for corporate purchase of renewable energy and investment into new renewables. And South Africa has some troubles with its energy grid. So having new renewables coming onto that market will be both helpful for companies to decarbonize and reach their targets, but also helpful for the country in general to be able to stabilize its energy grid. So I'd say that's one area. And then I also touched upon the supply chain is also very tricky, because it's such a big and diverse set of companies. And we've seen mobile network operators working much more closely with the tier 1 suppliers in particular, but also down to tier 2 and further up into the supply chain, to try and figure out how they can innovate products to reduce these embodied emissions that are trapped in them, and therefore how we can decarbonize these supply chains as well. So I'd say there are two areas that we've started to try and tackle, but there's still quite a lot more that needs to happen.
Well, thank you very much. I have a question to Mehwish Ramzan and also Dr. Hui. I'd like to start with you, Mehwish. What are the key internal mechanisms that really, in your organization, needs to be implemented and also embedded in the climate strategies to really move along here?
Yeah, so I'll share the net zero journey that Jazz did. We took this pledge in 2022 that we are going to become net zero by 2050, and since then we are working on a number of initiatives. To begin with, we are following the GSMA ESG metrics. It has 3 pillars for environment, which is emission, energy and waste reduction. So this is a kind of a metrics that we are following. For energy, for example, we are going for conservation practices and energy efficiency. And of course, Stephen mentioned that renewable energy is a big challenge for developing market like Pakistan. So that's not the number one choice, but we are considering other options as well. And for emissions, we are reducing our emissions by going for offsetting programs. For example, by plantation drives, by reducing the SIM card size, which ultimately leads to less pollution, and waste reduction. Circular economy is the big thing that we are incorporating in our business strategy, that by circulating the e-waste in our business operations, we can reduce our footprint.
Well, thank you very much, Mehwish Ramzan. And Dr. Hui, you shared your presentation already, but would you like to add anything on this topic, on the question that I just posed?
Sure, thank you. I think one of the things that I have not included in the presentation really it's about also governance in terms of how we structure our organization. So since few months back, what we have done is last year we set up a board sustainability committee to really oversee sustainability at the highest level. And then from it cascade down to the management. So in the last few months, what we have also done is really to establish a sustainability governance structure within each individual operating companies that we have in Singapore and Australia. And that's the whole idea of distributing accountability or cascading accountability into the different OpCo, their management, and subsequently into our top executive as well as the middle management. So I think that's one of the things that we're working very hard on in order to get this collective action that's being done across all our business.
Thank you very much. So turning now to you, Mats, what innovative business models have you seen that are really enhancing the sustainability in the telco section? I mean, you've worked in the sector for many years.
Sure, thank you. I think some are on the energy side. We have seen the need now with more and more renewable energy into the grid. There is a need to balance the grid, and several operators are in fact using the base stations as sort of, and the batteries that are there for backup as grid balancing and sort of offering services to the grids with energy balancing in different ways, and that is, I think, there are a lot of base stations where we have a lot of people, so then it's a relatively good match with where we need the power for the grid. Also, taking it one step further, as Stephen was talking about companies now investing in both power purchase agreements, but also direct investing in building, especially in countries with poor grid or poor energy supply, build energy plants and then offering that back to the grid. So the operator also becomes in a way energy providers to the countries and by investing in direct investment in solar and wind farms. And then I think also on the circularity side, so if the energy is one thing, then on the circularity, quite a lot of operators now offer mobile phones or handsets as in leasing models, especially to companies. And if the mobile operator have a lot of their emissions in sort of, if they don't have renewable energy, a lot of the emissions come from the energy consumption of the networks. But when they have taken care of that, then it's more about the other things. And for handsets, 90% of the emissions comes from the production. So producing the handset itself, the processors and the display and the camera, which are the main parts that use a lot of energy. And if you could prolong the life, you can reduce the sort of lifetime emissions from a handset. So I think a leasing model is very, very good for the whole industry to reduce the total carbon footprint.
Well, thank you very much, Mats Feldbeck-Sharp. Turning now back to you, Mirish, in terms of tangible, not only environmental, but also social benefits, and also, of course, the financial side on it has to be included here. What do you see from embedding climate strategies into your business models?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I would like to add, and I will emphasize the longevity of devices and network equipment. That is one thing, that by doing so, we can reduce those emissions for the long term. And also regarding the circularity of devices, it has a number of advantages. In fact, we are in the initial planning stage of introducing kind of a tech bin for Jazz, in which customers can drop off their unused handsets. Like there are over 5 billion handsets which are sitting in the drawers and they are not used by anyone. So we need to take those handsets out and recycle, or maybe first of all, we have to fix them, refurbish them, and then reuse. And the last option is recycling that. So this is kind of it has an additional benefit in a way that it has a component of digital and financial inclusion as well. So by giving the repaired handsets to the people who have affordability issues in the developing market, you are enabling them to connect digitally. So that is kind of a tangible solution that you can incorporate in your climate strategy, especially being a developing market.
Thank you very much. And also the urban mining perspective that you really have.
Yes,
You have a mine in your drawer. For many people, that's where you
Yes.
keep your old phones, right?
Yes.
So, Dr. Hui, your perspective on the embedding of climate strategies into the business models and the benefits, please.
Yeah, I think so. If I bring back to what I have talked about, essentially, if you look at the three enablers, they are not a sustainability enabler per se. So it is actually about people. When we talk about learning and development, it is about us engaging the learning and development team to say that, look, we need to do this learning and development. So there's this collaborative effort, and I think through that allows us to again upskill our fellow colleagues in that space, in that relevant area, and we're not like giving them anything under the sun, but we're really taking out that very specific climate related aspect to embed into their work. So I think that has helped in terms of really incorporating it as part of business as usual, and also people taking accountability for it. I often tell people, when we come and collaborate with you, it's not about giving you more work. I'm only asking you to convert 20% of your work into climate related. I'm not giving you 20% more work. So I think really that benefit its efficiency, as well as I think from an effectiveness perspective, it is only when the whole company in their respective function can level up in their respective area when it comes to climate related, then we'll be successful, because my department in group sustainability can never be an expert in all areas: HR, finance, corporate governance. Yeah.
Thank you. So is there any specific hurdle that is bigger than any other hurdle that you would like to shed some light on?
Yeah, sure. So we often say that the sustainability professionals, when we go and meet together, including the GSMA, we could bond and we could relate to each other very well, because every one of us faces similar challenges in terms of trying to do transformation work, right, or change. I think what really, in the past, the challenges really comes from a mindset issue, allowing people to understand what is it about. People might think that, again, it's your work, don't come and look for me. But I think we have moved on from there. So really the challenges at this point in time, it's about how do we work collectively with every one of them in a way that balances that transition. Because I think just transition in terms of moving towards net zero is equally important. For example, when the other panelists talk about renewable energy, we are renewable energy disadvantaged in Singapore as well. So there is a certain limit to how much or how fast we can push until the greater environment it's conducive for us to move. So really balancing that act between when to do what in a way that would be most effective to the company from a business point, and from a climate point, it's what the challenge is right now.
Thank you very much. And Mirish, would you like to add anything from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that customer behavior is another factor that determines the incorporation of climate strategy into your business strategy, because people are unfortunately more interested in the packages and the data and the continuity of the connections. So you know that switching to a clean energy and clean operations, it requires cost. So we need to make our customers aware that this is why we are doing it as a long-term benefit for everyone, as a nation, as a company as well, at a global scale also. So I think this factor needs to be incorporated.
Yeah. Thank you. So Stephen, bringing the industry perspective from the GSMA, what success stories can you share that is really, that you can highlight in this transition?
So I think we're seeing a lot of change happening across the sector, a lot of positive change. I think a lot of it is perhaps happening behind the scenes and it isn't necessarily public. So one of the success stories I would like to highlight is the level of cooperation that is going on between companies at the moment. So this isn't something that necessarily is talked about enormously much publicly, but we've seen this because when we made this net zero ambition back in 2019, we set up something called a Climate Action Task Force. And this was really a way in which we could bring together the industry, particularly those network operators, to work collaboratively on different climate issues, because we knew there were quite a lot of things that we would need to solve together. And we didn't even know all of the problems back in 2019. Obviously, each year we kind of uncover the next thing that we need to work on. And we started with, I think, between 20 and 30 operators back in 2019. Just this year, we've hit 75, and that now covers 80% of mobile connections around the world. So
80%?
80%.
Impressive.
So, you know, I think we've really hit a significant majority of the industry that is willing to work together to solve these issues. And some of these issues can only be solved collectively. So some of them involve action that needs to be taken within countries. So it might be direct engagement with the government to talk about the renewable energy challenges we've discussed before. But some of these other challenges, for example, around the supply chain, really is an engagement with a common set of suppliers. And we don't have a huge number of suppliers in our supply chain. So we have maybe less than 10 key suppliers for network equipment. We have maybe about 10 key suppliers that actually sell mobile handsets, mobile devices around the world. Some of them very, very big names like Apple and Samsung. We know some of those are actually making really big environmental commitments and progress. So we've seen Apple commit to, I think, having a carbon neutral supply chain by 2030. They've invested a lot into renewables in their supply chain. We've also seen them talk about increasing recycled content in their supply chain and their devices. So I think they're up to maybe about 30% recycled content. So this is fantastic. We can see companies actually put into action some of these challenges we talk around circularity. And I'd say that is, having those leaders is really helpful, because other companies then can't turn around and say it's not possible. Because you can point to them and say it is possible. This company's already doing it. There are some challenges in individual markets, but generally, you know, if it's been achieved in a market somewhere, it can be achieved in other markets as well. I'll also, this is not something that we usually do as an industry association, but I will give a positive shout out for regulation, and that is the regulation that the European Union has put in place to encourage more sustainability and circular economy in Europe.
So the design directive.
The Eco-Design Directive, exactly that. And that's really helping drive forward progress in this area. Things like the right to repair for devices, because we talk about, and we've talked about on this panel, you know, we really need to have it, as Max was saying, you know, the majority of the emissions of devices sit in its manufacture, so we need to have them in use as long as possible. So there are some, you know, there are some challenges there around maintaining kind of profitability, and if you're relying on selling significant number of devices each year, so there's a little bit of tension between those two things. But if we can also bring those devices back and that material back in, then we can have this circular economy. We can continue to sell significant numbers of devices each year, but as long as they are sustainable, they're coming back in and we're using them to make new devices.
Thank you, Stephen. So Mats, what success stories or story would you like to share from your perspective?
Well, I think I'll go back then to my sort of life at Ericsson, and I think, in fact, what Stephen was talking about, sort of the partnership across the supply chain, I think has been very, very important. And I mean, yes, for devices and for network equipment, there is already now quite few suppliers and quite good progress. But then at Ericsson, I knew that we had 24,000 suppliers. So it's a big
24,000.
24,000, and then of course a few of them stands for a very large part of the carbon footprint in the supply chain. I mean, maybe 200 is 80-90% of the total emissions, but you have to manage the rest. And then I would say that sort of the work that we started together with sort of the supply chain initiative with Exponential Roadmap, where we said we put hard requirements on our suppliers, but we also help them meet those requirements, learning from sort of the history. So really giving them advice, tools to help them with reporting, to help them to start their strategy. There's a lot of sort of things that are, if you're a small supplier, hard to get to grasp and get started with. And I think those tools, I really can encourage all companies to use the same tools. because then it becomes even stronger. If we and our competitors and also, I mean, all mobile operators have the same requirements, working in the with the same tools and direct towards them, then it's easier for supply to meet that. Then they know how to meet that. And I think that has been very successful in the way that it has been driven. It was very sort of early on to work in that way, and I think that is a really good story, I think.
It is a good story indeed. What success story would you like to share, or do you recognize the Ericsson story?
Yes, definitely. In fact, together with Ericsson, who is our network supplier, we do have a take-back program. Not only just the phone, we actually have a take-back program together with Ericsson. So all our Ericsson equipment goes back to Ericsson. And for last year, I think we've taken back about 190 tons. We sent back 190 tons.
190 tons.
Yes, back to Ericsson for responsible end of life management, and that's primarily because we were on a 5G rollout, so we actually had to change quite a fair bit of equipment, and I really think this kind of collaboration should not just be with one provider, but the rest of our supplier as well. So when you are able to, bring it back, when we talk about forward logistics, we move it to the customer, taking it back from customer. I think we need to enable that reverse logistic back to manufacturing, so that the material get reused back into new product, right? So to improve their circularity. So that's really I thought it's initiative that I wanted to share more. For us, I think from a mobile association, I think Stephen has been very humble. I felt like I'm new to the industry, like 3 years, but since I joined, I think GSMA has really done a good job in terms of bringing all the mobile operators across the world together. We kept the momentum going for 3 years, and then at that level, we are talking a lot about industry development. We're talking a lot about the things that's needed to effect a bigger change when the industry system is ready. Then when it cascades down to individual operator within our individual jurisdiction, it gets a lot easier when you have a bigger environment.
Of course.
So I would say that to me, it's been one of the success when it comes to the global movement of moving towards a net zero goal.
Thank you. And this is, of course, the collaboration element here, something you can build on more and more. So, Mirish, any success story or stories that you would like to share?
So I have two success stories. In past 2 years, I want to highlight what Jazz has achieved so far. So in past 2 years, we have planted over 36,000 trees, which is a part of a nature-based solution to carbon offset. So that is one success story because they are quite popular in Pakistan. In addition to that, we have also reduced the SIM card jacket size. And by doing so, we are avoiding around 3,800 tons of CO2 emissions per year. So that's a huge success in past 2 years. These are the two achievements.
Just from the SIM card size?
Yes,
wow.
Just because the rest of the card is all plastic waste. And this
true.
is a very small portion that is usable. So by just halving the SIM card size, we are approximately offsetting or avoiding 3,800 tons of CO2 emissions into the atmosphere. So that's a great achievement. Yeah.
The devil is indeed in the details, huh? I'd say.
Yeah.
So before we finish this panel, I'd like to ask you your experience so far at the COP and what you're hoping for. Let's start with you, Dr. Yu.
This is my first COP, and in fact, this is my first panel. I just registered. I feel good, and I think it's important for us to continue this conversation despite some challenges or controversy. And definitely, my wish for this year's COP really is to live up to the theme of COP29 in solidarity with the green world, that everybody would let your voice heard and really take action towards a net zero goal, so that we all have a better future better hope of keeping the 1.5, the Paris Agreement alive.
It's really on the CPR right now, but let's really push to keep it alive for sure. So Mats.
Well, I think that I was in a presentation this morning with Al Gore on something called Climate Tracer, where they use AI and satellite sensors together with science to trace emissions globally, both carbon emissions but also particles. And that was, I mean, Al Gore is always sort of a very interesting person to listen to, and he has a lot of sort of good information about sort of how much we subsidize oils and so on, so which is pretty depressing. But I think that was super interesting, and that tool demonstrates how digitalization and digital technologies really can make a difference, because suddenly all the cities know where they have the emissions, and they can sort of they trace sort of what's called black ships, which is sort of the ships that turn off their tracking device that is there for safety, but they turn it off because they do illegal fishing, or they go to ports that are not allowed, or so on, and they can then track also the emissions from those and see where they are. So a fantastic tool, I think. And then I think also in this COP it is like the feeling is mixed in a way. We have sort of some, I mean, the usual resistance from the oil lobby and from others, and from companies, countries that are dependent on oil in different forms, trying to stop things. But then I think when you get into the industry and business zones, you see everything that is happening, and sort of independent of elections and global crisis, there is still a drive within industry and within sort of the finance sector to make a difference and realize that, I mean, it's costly to mitigate climate, but talk about the cost of not doing it. The cost of inaction is huge, and I think that was also part of what Al Gore talked about. So I think if we have a high cost to take away the carbon and change, transition and electrify industry and transports, the cost of not doing it. I mean, look on all the things that are happening right now around us, and how that is sort of escalating very, very fast. I think that gives, I mean, if you can take it from a positive side, that really makes it important to drive the things like I mean, I must say, GSMA have done a fantastic job. I mean, covering so many of a whole industry. The telecom industry is clearly leading the way, and I think that is fantastic.
Thank you, Mats. That's a nice handover to you, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Mats. So yeah, I think I'd say two things actually coming into this conference. I think one is the disconnect that we're starting to see between business ambition and ambition from governments. So it used to be the other way around, that governments were leading and businesses were seen to be holding back, and it's really switched in recent years. And I think, you know, looking forward into what's going to happen in COPs from next year onwards, with the challenge that we might have around where the United States might be in this process, and if they do end up withdrawing, how are we going to maintain momentum? So, and I think by tapping into businesses and the level of ambition and the willingness to collaborate that businesses have, we can use this to perhaps step in and fill perhaps a vacuum that might be created if we do lose such a key player and part of the COP process. And there is a fantastic group called the Climate Champions that are already creating this bridge between the COP process and non-state actors, particularly businesses. So I would love to see Climate Champions kind of supercharged and brought much more into the fore to help really harness the ambition that businesses have to move things forward. So that would be the first thing. The second thing I would say is this year's COP, we have the first digitalization day. I can't actually say it.
It's very difficult.
It's a long word.
You're native speaking, but it's still difficult, yes.
So digitalization day, which is happening tomorrow. And I think there is fantastic promise. Actually, we hear a lot of negativity around how much energy data centers are using and how this is not good for the environment. Actually, we see a lot of ICT companies and telcos as well switching to renewables and really leaning into energy efficiency, and it's still a very, very small proportion of overall electricity use and carbon emissions around the world. I think we need to also consider how green digital action, so how we can leverage these digital technologies to actually support reducing emissions. There are lots of use cases for this from across the whole economy. Matt's touched upon one before around kind of smart energy technologies, so where we're using connectivity to better match supply and demand across energy systems. That's what we'll need to do, increasingly doing, because we've got more intermittent renewable energy coming onto grids. We need to balance that. That will only be done through connectivity and through smart connectivity. We know there's fantastic applications in smart agriculture. We know that manufacturing 4.0 is already heading in that direction. Lots of efficiencies there. And we haven't even touched upon AI, which is usually the topic of every conversation at the moment. But I think once we bring that into the mix, to get AI thinking about green digital action, then we're really going to be able to accelerate that. So there would be my two takeaways. It's kind of get businesses involved, a bit more progressive businesses, I should say, not the oil and gas lobby. We can leave them outside.
We leave them behind.
We'll leave them behind, please. Yes. And then leaning into green digital technologies to support supercharging what we need to do.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. Mirish, your take on this.
So I would just like to sum this thing up that the purpose of COP is to raise the ambition in terms of NDCs, right? Every government is proposing their NDCs and they are raising their ambition day by day. Every year they are portraying some new thing. But I think my key takeaway, or the thing that I really just take out of this conference, is to start taking action. That is much needed. Start from somewhere. Being a telco, we are doing our part, and we encourage other industries also to take their role, because we are the least contributor in terms of GHG emissions, but GSMA made it possible for us to connect and just take action on that. So why not every other organization or other industry can have a collaborative effort around this subject? So that's my thing.
Thank you for ending in such a positive way. I mean, it is complex, and you're sharing your success stories and also bringing up such great numbers. It's truly inspiring and impressive. So keep trailblazing, and good luck with the digitalization day. I actually said it. What would you know?
Said it perfectly.
And the AI that might solve some of our challenges here. But best of luck, all four of you, with your important work. And thank you for sharing your insights.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And listen. Besides our live broadcast, we also have really great guests that are coming to our studio and that we are gathering and catching on the fly to get interviews with. You can watch all of these interviews on WeDon'tHaveTime.org. And yesterday we had the pleasure of interviewing Achim Steiner. He's administrator of the United Nations Development Program, and he came to our studio for a very special interview. He talked about the NDCs that we talk about very frequently in this studio, of course, and they will be a big thing, as we know, at the next year's COP in Brazil. And all the countries in the global community really have to start stepping up on sharpening their NDCs and working on that already now. So after this interview that we're going to air now with Dr. Achim Steiner, we'll hear from other participants at this COP on their expectations and also experiences. But first, here is Achim Steiner.
So it's really fantastic to have Achim Steiner here. He's the head of the UN Development Program, a very important UN agency in this whole story of climate change and its nexus with poverty and overcoming some of the great challenges we're facing in the world today. Achim, you're here in Baku on the Caspian Sea. And the atmosphere seems to be very positive in these corridors. I think some people before the conference felt, because of some political changes that we perhaps know in the world, that there might be a very depressive mood here, but far from it.
I would agree. I think the COP has gotten off to a very busy start, despite the usual kind of negotiations around the agenda. This is a working COP right now, and you can see it in the corridors, you can see it in the meeting rooms, in the committees. Essentially the parties have gotten down to work, and there was also an early win, so to speak, with Article 6 and some of the decisions that have been a long time coming on how we will run the carbon markets in the future. So clearly this is a COP that has the opportunity at this moment in time of, yes, a lot of disruption, a lot of economic stress in the world, and also new political developments on the other side of the Atlantic. Clearly, I think there is a determination to move forward, but there is also a degree of uncertainty that is now looming over this COP. And I think we should not underestimate the fact that this uncertainty is both of a political nature, but perhaps the more worrying part is, will it also slow down the scaling up of investments? Financial markets are fickle by nature, and they are watching right now what are the implications of some of the political signals that are shifting. And I think nothing could be more helpful than a strong, clear and unequivocal signal on the financing question that is so central here in Baku, to countries across the world, to the developing world, but also to the financial markets, to business and entrepreneurs who need to make very long-term decisions right now.
One of the main roles, I suppose, in the climate process for the UN Development Programme is to assist developing countries in forging their what they call nationally determined contributions, national climate action plans, which began with the Paris Agreement and then ratcheted up over time. That was the plan. We're in that process right now. The next ratcheting, it sounds quite painful, but we're in that process right now. We're hoping, of course, that this will be completed well before and certainly by Brazil next year when they host the next UN Climate Conference, COP30. How many countries are you assisting, and how is it going at the moment?
Well, let me first remind those who sometimes think an NDC is just a document. Actually, it was a brilliant answer and solution to a major dilemma in 2015 when the Paris Agreement was negotiated. Namely, the ability of where countries could commit to act was so far from where the science was telling us we needed to be, that the only way that the Paris Agreement could remain credible was to create this ratcheting up mechanism. So every 5 years, countries continue to increase their levels of ambition. And remarkably, we are now in the NDC 3.0 round, and it is working. People often forget that before Paris, we were on track to a 4-degree plus world. Just with the NDCs since then, in Paris, they were still very raw products. Then in Glasgow, NDC second generation, we essentially were close to bringing down the global warming pathway to maybe 2.63 degrees. So some dismiss this because it's obviously not enough, but let's think ahead another 10 years. Can we, by 2035, make this next generation of NDCs, which are essentially national climate and development strategies, really more ambitious? And for UNDP, for the UN system, the Secretary General, these are also the focus of our support to countries, because they are expressions of national sovereignty. They are the foundation which countries can assess their options for acting, but also to say to the world, and with additional support from other parts of the world, namely what is being negotiated here, the financing side, we could do even more, even faster. And in that sense, for us today, we have a climate promise that we have made, which is for up to 125 developing countries. UNDP, together with the UN sister agencies and development system, is able and willing and ready to offer support. And right now we are already engaged with, I think, close to 90 countries. We expect that to go well over 100. And the experience leading up to Glasgow was such a positive one, because for many countries it's also an opportunity to quickly learn from what are other countries doing, what worked in a country that is comparable to mine, what is the policy, the legislation, the degree of ambition we can afford. And I think what is also very encouraging, you have seen here in Baku, the Troika, Azerbaijan, the United Arab Emirates and Brazil coming forward with their NDCs. Now, they have only just been presented, or some of them not yet presented and released, but we have seen, for example, from Brazil, a remarkable set of raising ambition levels and commitments as the country that will host the next COP. A leading developing economy, sending a signal that the future is in this transition and transformation. And actually, increasingly, it is developing countries who are now leading the frontier of change and transformation. That was not the case 10, 15 years ago.
We had a good boost from a developed country just the other day, and I think it was formalized yesterday with the UK committing an 80% emission reduction target. So, I mean, hand in hand, you know, rich
Can we
and
talk
poor.
about that for a moment? Because I think that's the other thing that has happened over the last 10 years. And, you know, we often produce these reports before these conferences take place and essentially focus on how much distance we have not covered, or how much further we have to go and how much more quickly. What we underestimate is that these COPs that are so often maligned and everything is too slow, which is true, nevertheless they are producing the only solid foundation on which the world family of nations is actually moving forward. We are now seeing in Latin America 60% of all electricity consumed is renewable. We are seeing a transition in economies from Uruguay to Kenya to Albania to Denmark, all the way back to China, where the percentage of electricity that is now produced with renewable energy resource, i.e. no longer with fossil fuels, is growing exponentially to the point where Uruguay, Kenya and others are at 90% of their electricity being produced with renewables. In Europe, in the EU context, a legislative step that by 2040 Europe will have reduced its emissions footprint by 90%. And then the UK coming with an NDC here, essentially bringing Britain back into the leadership role that it had claimed and also displayed in Glasgow as the COP host. I think the Prime Minister, in what he brought to Baku and what he presented as the level of ambition right now, is exactly the signal that we need to send. The industrialized countries have ratcheted up their levels of ambition. They're investing hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, what is often not recognized is that developing countries are equally investing hundreds of billions of dollars a year in climate action. Perhaps we need to begin to recognize that everybody is investing, but what is being discussed here in Baku is, can the industrialized nations also add some more fuel, so to speak, to the ability of developing countries to move faster, and thereby the climate finance we are negotiating here becomes a multiplier and not a chessboard on which one side is trying to beat the other one as if we are bargaining over you know, a particular commodity. What we are trying to find out is, can we mobilize public and private sector resources in a way that could quadruple, quintuple or multiply by 10 times what countries are spending of their own taxpayers' money already in these transitions. And that is what is going to make the difference whether the next NDCs can come close to 1.5 degrees.
Yeah, because NDCs without finance are an aspiration, aren't they? But as you rightly point out, there is money moving. And of course, if you said 10 or 15 years ago that the world was spending an estimated 1.2 trillion in climate finance flows, I think the people that do this have got better at calculating it, you would have gone, well, that sounds pretty good. But the gap, and you mentioned 10 times, which is kind of interesting because the Climate Policy Initiative out of the UK, but many other places around the world, I think they feed a lot of the climate finance assessments with their data. And their estimate is that we need maybe between 10 and 12 trillion by 2030 to really set the stage for a net zero 2050. Still too much of the flow is within the richer countries. But I suppose the question is, where do we go with finance from here? So as you say, it is growing and developing countries themselves are spending their money on climate action and climate flows. How do we unlock even bigger amounts of cash basically needed to meet the 1.5 or keep it alive? Let's not keep it alive, let's just meet it and hit the net zero in 2050.
First of all, I think by demystifying these extraordinary numbers, I mean, we are talking trillions now, and you know, people suddenly say, oh, it's 2 trillion, it's 3 trillion, maybe it's 12 trillion. I think we have to take a small step back and say, look, none of us know exactly what the volume of finance will be that is needed. It depends on how many countries are able to mobilize private sector investment, how many need perhaps public finance, concessional finance to create the conditions. If a small island nation today were to switch over to electric mobility, it simply cannot finance the initial infrastructure that would be needed. But it would actually save a lot of money in terms of mobility costs if it were to switch to an electric platform. So why does the world find it so difficult to help the 30, 40 small island developing nations to pivot to 100% not only clean and renewable electricity production, but actually also mobility? You don't run out of electricity on an island in terms of driving your car. So these are small examples that are not necessarily material to the larger emissions metric, but they keep a global family of nations together and moving forward together. Let me also say, people need to put things in perspective. 1.3 trillion is the number that the G77 plus China has brought to the table here as its expectation on a new collective quantified goal for climate financing. Now, to most people, that number seems, you know, astronomical. Two facts. The IEA estimates that this year alone, the world will invest over $3 trillion in new energy infrastructure. Fascinating. 2 trillion of those 3 trillion will actually be in renewable energy infrastructure. So we're talking about $3 trillion energy infrastructure market per annum. If you project into that 1.3 trillion of public and private finance, it doesn't seem so strange anymore to talk in those terms. What is scaring people is that, you know, we barely managed, if at all, to reach the $100 billion of climate finance. How on earth will we ever be able to move to 1.3 trillion in these economically challenging times? Well, I think I would ask the question in a different way. How much is it worth investing now together in order to avoid the kind of crisis that we know is unaffordable, non-financeable and catastrophic? Secondly, if we're able to spend $2,400 billion a year right now on defense expenditures and armies, how do we rationalize not finding maybe 100, 150 or $200 billion together to invest in the greatest risk to humankind in the 21st century? So we need to reframe this debate and, most importantly, get away from this notion that the developing world is asking the taxpayer of the developed world to pay for its development. Again, the developing world is already investing multiples in hundreds of billions of dollars in climate action, climate transition, compared to the $100 billion that the wealthiest nations have put on the table. We are haggling over the wrong numbers, and we need to, in my mind, move forward with the mindset is about co-investment, and with that co-investment we multiply many-fold the investments that people are ready to make, whether governments through their public budgets in the developing world, or, as is already the case today, the private sector, the entrepreneurs, the financial markets.
You know, I'm so glad you so eloquently phrased that, because, I mean, in fact, it's absolutely true, and all the economic studies going back donkey's years have shown that actually it's going to be more expensive to deal with uncontrolled climate change than any investments you would ever have
Lord
to make.
Nicholas Stern, the cost of inaction.
Yeah,
it's grown exponentially.
It's actually grown exponentially. And exactly. And the Climate Policy Initiative out of London, which I mentioned before, even their assessments say, actually, just step back and echoing what you said, they sound like big numbers, but the world is actually investing very similar numbers anyway in infrastructure. Why not just make it green, which is maybe just a marginal little bit of an extra cost, which pays back so well over time?
Add to that, every dollar invested in renewable energy infrastructure creates 2 to 3 times more jobs than in traditional fossil fuel-based infrastructure. I mean, the economic multipliers, both in terms of how we avoid enormous losses in GDP, which again Lord Nicholas Stern and others have provided us with very clear insights now of what it would mean to not act, but secondly on the positive win-win and co-benefits of investing in these energy transitions. And again, if you take a small island developing nation, it on average pays 300% to 400% more for a kilowatt hour of electricity because it has to import the diesel to run the generators. So we could make access to affordable and clean energy a driver for development, not only on small island developing states, but for the 600 million people on the African continent who don't have access to electricity today. These are the positive economic multipliers.
Absolutely. Let's just come to a final topic. So there's a big push here by the US and China and others to have the national climate plans, the NDCs, include all gases. So, and these are some gases which some of our viewers may never have heard of, but we have to mention them anyway. Tropospheric ozone, nitrous oxides.
Trust you to know them all, Nick.
No, I've been staying up late at night revising this.
Yes.
But I haven't passed yet. I haven't got them all yet. There's a missing one. I'm missing one. Methane, of course, which comes from the oil and gas industry and agriculture. And there's a kind of momentum here that perhaps if they were in the NDCs, there'd be more focus on them because they only attract about 2% of climate finance, but yet they're superheating. But most of them just live for a very short length of time. So if you stopped sending them out, you might get a real benefit in terms of keeping within the temperature limits of the Paris Agreement, keeping the 1.5 degrees centigrade not breached. We have a little campaign called BuyMoreTime. I don't expect you to be aware of it, but do you think that's a good idea to make sure the NDCs cover all the forces of climate change, not just the CO2, but everything's in there, sort of thing?
Unquestionably so, and I would say, why would a country not want to include all the actions it is either already taking or could take to reduce its emission footprint? In that sense, what an NDC that would include all these gases would do is actually give more visible expression and transparency to the contribution that a country is making globally to addressing this. And let's take methane or gas flaring from oil and gas exploration. In today's world, this is actually not only a major problem for the atmosphere, for climate change, it's also an economically ridiculous waste of resources. So again, what we need here is policy and regulatory frameworks that create the incentives to address the emission of those gases, or in a sense to then address the reduction of those gases in terms of their impact. We often forget that our fossil fuel based economy is still being subsidized to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayers' money every year. And if you take the IMF calculations, they actually put the total cost and impact on our economies at, I think, close to $7 trillion as a result of essentially subsidies taking us in the wrong direction. Now imagine if we could just move 10 or 15% of those subsidies towards addressing the reduction or the elimination of the emission of those supercharged gases. It would be another way of, let's say, first of all, recognizing the efforts countries can make. Secondly, enabling them to be a proactive player in the global effort to address climate change. So NDCs are not a negotiated document. They are a country's sovereign expression of, first of all, how it views the issue of climate change. Secondly, how it translates that into its own ability to address it. And thirdly, what it is able to contribute to a global collective effort negotiated annually through these COPs in order to help the world get back on a 1.5 degree path. And being able to also articulate what is the financing, domestically, internationally, private, public, that is needed to get to the level of ambition that we know next year in Belém at COP30 in Brazil. We have to demonstrate that the ratcheting up those levels of ambition are actually both real and feasible and implementable. And I think that is why broadening the net with which we look at each country's footprint, but also its ability to act, makes absolute sense.
Finally, just a very small thing. I thought it might be worth just mentioning this, that, people come and go, and people have been in the process a long time, and then they pass on, and it goes to a new generation. And this year we lost, I think, one of the good thinkers and good political thinkers on climate change and environmental issues generally, and a good friend of the developing world too, which was the former German environment minister Klaus Topfer, and a predecessor of you as the executive director of UNEP when he was there, and then you followed him before you went to UNDP. Do you have a few words to say about Klaus Topfer?
How much time have we got?
Yeah.
No, thank you, Nick, for mentioning Klaus Topfer. I think he embodied, first of all, a generation of leaders in politics who not only recognized the significance of environmental change, he also embraced it as a responsibility to act on it. It's not easy being a politician, especially 20, 25, 30 years ago, and to be an environment minister and to, really challenge industry, political parties, society, consumers with the science and the knowledge that was beginning to tell us at the time, Houston, we have a problem. Klaus Topfer was not only brave, visionary, courageous, he was also inspirational. Many will remember in Germany that when he thought he had been part of cleaning up the River Rhine, he actually put on a very strange diving suit at the time and a swimming cap and jumped into the River Rhine to say, this is what you can do when you put your mind to it. This river is coming back alive. But he also led UNEP at a time when climate change had become a recognized threat, but ultimately also a divisive issue between developed and developing countries. I think he, again, was one of the pioneers who managed to bring climate change, environment, development, and ultimately an age of responsibility in addressing these issues together. And I think the legacies that he has left, both in terms of people, including us, institutions, laws, and pioneering innovations, I think are testimony to a life well lived. And we have lost quite a number of colleagues that is in the last few years. They are, in a sense, a generation on whose shoulders we stand now.
Thank you so much for being with us, Achim. Thank you so much for your work. Thank you very much for running UNDP, a very important part of the UN system. And let's keep our fingers crossed for Brazil next year.
Absolutely. Okay, Brazil will be a great host for the
Well,
COP,
you're partly Brazil as well, so therefore you'll have a good time.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Lovely.
times, up against difficult tasks, I don't go in for hopes and dreams. What inspires me is human ingenuity and determination. Our ability to get knocked down and to get up again, over and over again, until we accomplish our goals.
My husband is currently on the battlefield, and actually he's protecting Ukraine over there. And I'm trying to do what I can do here to protect climate as well. In the cities near to the battlefield, they all also are caring for the climate. They're trying to present and implement projects to adapt to climate change, because that gives you as well the feeling of hope that there would be your country to live in. There would be a country after the war. There would be a country amidst climate crisis.
The lady I'm standing with, this picture, is my neighbor Florence in Karakum. In July this year, this was us, standing in all that remained of her home after the devastation of Hurricane Beryl. At 85, Florence has become one of the millions of victims of runaway climate change this year alone.
So this COP is known as the Finance COP. We need more money into adaptation, into loss and damage, into mitigation, all of these areas, so that we ourselves can be more resilient nations. I know for Dominica in 2015, we were struck by Tropical Storm Erica, and then 2 years later, we were struck again by Hurricane Maria. And for us, the constant devastation, being in that constant cycle of devastation, it's not sustainable. So for us, meeting those climate finance goals is not a matter of just asking for money, it's a matter of our survival.
So, welcome back for our final session from today's broadcast here in Baku at COP29. Today we've invited three great guests for a conversation on positive tipping points, stories on energy and transport, but also within the studio as well. Not only Katarina do we have here, but Anita Zonia, environmental warrior and founder of the Spice Warriors. And we'd also like to bring in from our studios in Stockholm in Sweden, David and Christina. Yes, they're with us. Hi there. Hi there. Hi. And you got any reflections on today's broadcast?
Yes, we do. I really like the Potsdamer Institute and the tipping points. And of course, a warmer climate will give us more storms. In conclusion with that, our economy needs a stable climate. Okay. And the Exponential solutions session talked on that. And for that to happen, we need much more coordination, which we don't have today. So, and to accelerate the actions that we actually do. There are only 60 months to 2030. That's my reflection. What's your reflection, Dave?
My reflection is how positive Achim Steiner of UNDP was in your talk with him. More in general, he brought a very positive attitude to your conversation, and he mentioned the enormous market of renewable energy and the energy infrastructure, and put that in relation to the finance goals. And the trillions of dollars that are being discussed. My view is on
and
that is that
David, he also hammered home that the developing countries aren't sitting back and waiting for handouts from the developed countries.
No.
They're getting on with and spending their own taxpayers' money on actually moving the green economy forward. Sorry to interrupt. I think it was so positive and so important, you know.
That's very positive, and that's a perfect segue to what I was getting at,
Yeah.
actually, because I do believe that we have not enough confidence we don't have enough confidence as a global community in the transition. But maybe that goes mostly for the Western or developed world. Maybe in the developing world, they have more confidence and they are really making ready to leapfrog into the new renewables economy. But when we get the whole global community, we will really have that big exponential push
good point.
towards change. Just need to get rid of oil and fossils and really have confidence in the transition. It will be unstoppable.
So thanks a lot, guys. Lots of love to Stockholm, and back to you, Katarina.
Well, I'm curious to your reflections of the day, Anita Soina. You are a founder of Spice Warriors, and you're a global youth leader in your continent, really, not just in your country of Kenya. So, what have you picked up during the day?
So I attended sessions that were talking about just transition, and if you look at, for example, Kenya, 94% of our electric grid is renewables. So that means we are okay, and also we are good to say that. And also looking at the African continent, which is so rich in solar, wind, and all that. But then the challenge that comes in is the infrastructure bit of it, and also the issue of as a continent, when we talk about the coal and the fossil fuels that we have, it means also our development is affected. So I attended a meeting where there was a very serious debate on fast phase in, fast phase out, and so last phase in, last phase out, which was very interesting to hear. Yeah.
So what did you pick up? Anything else during the day? You've been networking a lot. That's one of your specialities, that you get to talk to a lot of people, especially youth. I guess they connect with you very well in your position.
Yeah, I was able to interact with a group of climate communicators who are using different platforms, and myself as a digital influencer, and looking at how can we leverage on a language that appeals to people, tailor content that is tailored to different communities and different groups, so they are able to understand the issues, because sometimes we use general language to talk about climate issues. And I was also at the Indigenous Peoples Pavilion with my fellow Maasai people, and it was interesting to see that we have most of them at COP this year as compared to last year, and most of them are showcasing, because and COP is not just about the negotiations and the serious part of it. It's also about being able to connect our work to possible support from different people, showcasing what we do back at home, because that is what really matters the most, what we do back at home.
Thank you for highlighting this, Anita. Really, this is important. It's not only about the negotiations and the big plenary sessions. Thank you. So let's move on. It's my great pleasure now to introduce some new guests here in the studio. Next to me here is Karin Svensson. You are Chief Sustainability Officer at Volvo Group. Welcome back. You were here the other day too. It's always a pleasure to interview you. So, and also Annika Ramsköld, Chief Sustainability Officer at Vattenfall AB. And I think we might be joined by another guest shortly. But let's start with you, Karin. How are we doing on electrifying heavy transport? I mean, can you share some of the positive examples from the Volvo Group, please?
I think we are coming there. I think the positive thing is that the solutions are there. If we look upon our portfolio, we have battery electric trucks, buses, construction equipment, machines available. And we know that they are working. We are seeing a steady progress in the sales. Maybe not as quick as we were hoping for, but we are seeing that we're getting there at least. So,
thank you, Karin. I know you have a question for Annika.
Yes, indeed, I do, Annika. You work for Vattenfall. Actually, I take my energy in Berlin from Vattenfall.
That's great to know.
I remember once saying to one of your colleagues on one of the shows we had, can you promise me you're going to decarbonize your supply? Okay, I'll stay with you for another 5 years. So anyway, no, it's one of Europe's largest producers and retailers of electricity and heat. What are some of the uplifting examples within your company and your sector?
Well, I think, first of all, if we look how we have changed our portfolio when it comes to the fuels and sources that we use for both electricity and heat, we have since 2017 reduced our carbon emissions by 69%, by really shifting the portfolio very clearly. So I think that in itself, to completely shut down all the coal plants and replace a lot of the gas and then grow tremendously in wind and solar, battery, also making the existing assets much more efficient, like the nuclear plants and the hydro plants. So I think those are some very good examples.
What's your overall goal? What's your overall target?
Our overall target is, of course, to be net zero by 2040, and we have a 1.5 degree science-based target for 2030.
Right.
And our overall strategy is to enable fossil freedom that drives society forward. So it's about really engaging throughout the value chain. So we have, if we want to talk about success stories, I think it's also about how we not only provide the green electrons and hydrogen, but how we also bring solutions that are fossil-free transport and fossil-free materials to the market through partnerships, like we've had with Volvo Cars earlier to bring the first plug-in hybrids there. We have the partnership with SSAB and LKAB to produce the fossil-free steel via hybrid and so forth. So we go further into the value chain, and then of course also on the demand side.
Indeed.
Yeah. What are your impressions? Or no, I think it's over to you actually, Katarina. Can you go back to? Oh no, we're actually waiting for Amy.
I'm waiting for Amy.
So
Is
creating a
Amy
little bit of
joining
doubt
us?
in our
No.
script here. Maybe we can have a little bit.
Amy's not joining us right now, so
Okay.
I'm not sure. She's
Let's
not
go back to some other issues.
Yes,
then.
please do.
Let's carry on with this. So, what about? I mean, this is a conference of many countries, right? And not just European ones, etc. Although I must say, if you look at a map of the world right now in terms of who's doing best on emission reductions, it looks like it's Europe, right? And a few other lights in different parts of the world. But Europe is really showing a great sense of leadership right now, and we hope, of course, that another large country will also continue to show leadership, but we don't know quite yet what is going to happen there. But do you get a sense from being in these corridors and that there is a buzz about action, not just within the European context, but also from other countries, from people you talk to inside events or things like that? Are you feeling more confident than you were maybe a few weeks ago after certain elections in certain places? Yeah.
I would definitely say so.
That was a leading question, but I like it.
Oh, yeah.
No, but I would definitely say so. I've been talking to a lot of Indian companies, and there I see great progress. And of course, we've seen statistics like 60% of the renewable capacity is built in China. So of course, things are happening. And I think, like you said, we might be in the forefront in Europe, but if we talk about speed, I would say then we're not in the forefront, because I think the speed comes definitely from a lot of other continents and countries where I'm positively surprised, I have to say.
Yeah, yeah.
I agree with Annika. I think it's absolutely so that we see that there are ambitions in many parts of the world. What I think is important to remember is that we might not have one solution that can fit everyone. So in the case of decarbonizing transportation, I think we need to think about that there could be different solutions. So we have this three-pronged approach where we talk about battery electric, fuel cell electric, but we also think that there is actually room for the internal combustion engine still, but then filled with something else than with
Not the fossil fuels.
Yeah,
No.
with like hydrogen or e-fuels or something like that. And I think that gives us a great possibility to actually decarbonize different transport applications and also different markets and regions, because this will be different for different parts of the world.
It makes sense when you come to think of it. It is very varied, the sources of energy, and also, of course, the demands in different sectors.
And if I can just add, I think transportation and also energy, that's something that everyone needs in every part of the world. So we need to find solutions that fits for that specific region.
So Karin and Annika, and I'm turning to you first, Annika. What needs to happen in terms of policy to speed up this energy transition? I mean, we are getting impatient. Some of us, correct? Yes.
Absolutely. No, but I think, again, coming back, I think why everyone keeps saying it, but we do need a price on carbon throughout the world, because right now it's only like 76% is outside of having a carbon price. So carbon pricing is, of course, very important. We also talk a lot about permitting. There I see great progress in Europe, but then it's different again between different countries, how well it's defined. So we need permitting to move forward faster.
For instance, in the offshore wind sector.
Renewable
like
energy,
that, yes, exactly. But then I think one thing that is sometimes not really talked as much about as it need to be is public procurement. The demand push that public procurement really creates, because it's enormous amounts of money that goes into public procurement. So if they also jump on the train and put demands like we as a private business do, then we would definitely have the demand push and also deploy these solutions quicker. But I think in general we need also to find the de-risking mechanisms. If we take for us, we want to build a lot of new renewable capacity, and we need to make the investment decisions way ahead of knowing if the customer is out there. There are some customers that really are in the forefront, and with those we can form public, so PPA, so now I'm getting very tired.
Public-private partnerships.
Exactly. Thank you.
Too much work today at the COP. I think we're all in the same place, right?
and that we have with, for instance, Volvo on onshore wind, but we also have it with BASF and others. So there you have a bit of security. But in a way, we also take a bet, because now I'm very confident that you will be there also for many years. But what if they default, and could we find some kind of mechanisms with credit facilities in the background from certain countries, for instance? So there are a number of things that still needs to be there, and a lot of it is about de-risking. And de-risking can be policies or finances.
Indeed,
or
it
whatever.
can be, for sure. So coming back to the what you said just now, could you share a good example of the procurement procedure that has been very strong and helpful in the energy sector? Do you have any examples to share there? Because it is a powerful tool.
It is, and I think if I take an example in Netherlands, they are fairly good at sort of setting requirements when they do tendering for wind farms, for instance, where they weigh in a much more clearer way both social and environmental elements. So there you need to prove yourself in that, and then that is part of the evaluation process. And I think then it's very powerful, and we're happy because we are in the forefront on that, and that also helps us to be able to continue and push for those pieces. But still, having that said, we say when we want to move even further into getting access to fossil-free steel and to get that into the tender, then we still do not really know. We have examples right now where we have condition agreements even before we have a FID, so the final investment decision. And there we have secured low emission steel. But then the question is towards the end, both if the supplier can actually use it and what the price comes up to in the very end. But so there is I think in this area there are so many elements that need to fall into place at the same time.
And that's one of the reasons we're here, right? To meet and discuss these things. So Karin, what would you like to share on this topic here?
With regards to policies, I fully agree with Annika that we do need more to push on the demand side. Today we have lots of regulation that will on the supply side to say that we need to have a certain level of zero emission vehicles at a certain point, but we also need to have customers demanding these solutions. And of course we would like to see more of that the cost for driving an electric truck, as an example, must come on par with driving a diesel truck. Today you could say it's far too cheap to drive a diesel truck compared to an electric truck, which makes it difficult for our customers. Also, I think public procurement is another very powerful tool to create a market, and we see good examples, of course, on the bus side, where this has been done for quite a long time. You know, we have been selling electric buses for more than 10 years. That works perfectly fine. We also see good examples for construction equipment, for example, in Stockholm, where we actually can prove that it's not only beneficial from a climate perspective, but it's increasing productivity, it's better for air quality, it's better for the operator, it's less noise, vibrations, and it doesn't have to come at a higher cost either. So policies and in that area, I think, is really important.
Can I just jump in here? Because I'd love to ask this question, but you know, one thing that I've noticed in the last, and I've seen it before, but it seems to have come back a little bit, it's this kind of disinformation about electric vehicles and disinformation about renewable energy popping up again, and not just popping up in Europe or USA, but popping up in Africa as well. Do you, can your companies do something about that? Because, you know, it really is unbelievable, some of the things that are said about, I mean, there's still articles about range anxiety, as if in an electric vehicle you only go 20 miles and you're going to be stuck, you know, rather than we know how it's going. Or wind farms are killing masses of birds, and it's always a picture of an eagle on the ground, you know. Or that, yeah, there are many different examples of where this seems to be coming back, and I don't know why it's coming back. I can guess, but I don't know for sure.
But your question is if we can do something about it, and I think we are, as much as possible. So if we take all those myths related to wind farms, there we do a lot of collaboration with the academia, and we do a lot of measurements. So it's about creating facts that are then proving that it's not true. So I think that's one way, but it won't help that we are telling the story. We need to have others telling the story.
Exactly.
But I think a lot to base it on facts and science is most likely the best way forward.
I think with trucks and cars, electric trucks and cars, it's the old image of something on fire, as if the battery caught fire. And quite frankly, I'd probably rather be in an accident in an electric truck than one that's actually full of petroleum, right? I mean, it's these kinds of mythologies which are just percolating around, and they're spreading to different countries as well. I don't know where it comes from.
And I think in the case of commercial vehicles, the first thing is for people, policymakers, others, to understand that they're actually there and they are around and they work, so that it's not only do I dare, how long can I drive? They might not even know that they exist. But today, you know, we have, next year we will launch a truck with a range of 600 kilometers.
Wow.
So it's not a matter of if we can do this, it's just when we do it. So I think that's the first thing.
But may I build on, because I think about the myths, I think there it's something that we all can do together. It's the general acceptance of the fact that we now we need to build a lot of renewable capacity and grid. That will be visible. There is no doubt about that. So it means that we need acceptance of, in order for us to do the transition, it will be noticed. And I think we've all talked about NIMBY, so not in my backyard. However, I think we've moved into banana. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone.
Oh, and that's banana.
Bananas.
That's a new one. That's a new one. That is bananas.
That is bananas. And I think here each and every one of us has a role to play. And again, it doesn't help if it's the utilities and the energy companies that say that you need to accept it. It's actually those that need to be, if you're an individual consumer or if you're a B2B business that needs this, we all need to talk about it, that it's something we need. And then we need to accept, I really like wind farms and I think it's nice. I wouldn't mind having it close to me. But I think that is also something where I think both politicians and others need to talk about it.
Well, thank you so much, Annika Rangfeld and Karin Svensson, for joining us here at the final session of today. It's always a delight to listen to you, and keep up the strong work here. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And let's move on. And now we're joined by two new guests here in the studio. It's Amy Redgers, your Regional Program Specialist, Climate Change and Gender, UN Women. And also we have with us Fithriar Iskandar, and you are a medical doctor with climate and health as your expertise. Wonderful to have both of you here. And let's start with you, Fithriar. Among many other roles, you're also a member of the UN Women the UN Women 30 for 2030 network. It's a long title. And also Youth Advisory Group at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine Centre for Climate Change and Planetary Health. So please tell us, how is the planetary crisis affecting our health already, especially for young people?
Thank you so much. So I think everyone has already agreed how current climate crisis impacting everyone's health, particularly the young children, youth, and everyone, women. And in this case, I want to touch upon how it really impacting within the mentally and then physically state of the young people. For now, I often hear from my colleague, they say they're really anxiety for their future, and this now we call it like the climate anxiety. So that's definitely one of the truly like real impact how the climate change really affecting the mental state of the young people. And then the second, maybe in the more technical situations and on the how this kind of climate crisis impacting the promoting the disaster, like climate-induced disasters, which force women, young people to migrate or relocate, which in this situation they will not provided with a good hygiene and sanitation accessibility. And in this case also how the young women and the women itself cannot access the good care for their SRHR, for the sexual reproductive health rights also. And the second one, how also the food insecurity impacting the young children, the young women, especially children, which their growth and development really rely on the supply of the agriculture, which like if the food is not there, and then how can they gain nutritious food for their growth and development. And then the last one, I think it's really really evident, especially in the Asia Pacific. I live in Borneo Island, which I just feel like every year it's getting more hotter, and in here we know that the heat-related diseases, like the situations on how extreme our weather for now for the hot, and then the heat itself will impact the women and then the young people who maybe unfortunately their economic status are not really good, so they need to work outside. And definitely for in the rural areas, we know how often the farmers also they just ask for the children, for their younger maybe the older daughter to go to the farm, like to help the community, to help their family to grow food and everything. And in these situations, definitely for the pregnant women, young children, they will be affected from the heat, and it will impact their health, especially the growth within the pregnant woman, for the babies, and the growth of the adolescents and young children.
Thank you for pointing this out. It is indeed complex and very alarming.
So Amy, it's great to see you. Thanks for being with us. And so there is apparently a growing amount of data and evidence that underscores the necessity of incorporating gender equality into considerations in just transition policies and initiatives. So can you explain to the audience the importance of doing this, why it's vital?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I think, you know, the COP28 partnership on gender responsive just transitions and climate action was a really important moment. I think we've got about 82 different member states who have signed up to this partnership. And it really promotes sort of three key issues. One is around meaningful participation of women and girls as part of the just transition. Secondly, an analysis and sort of a real understanding of the links between gender equality and the just transition, and then really trying to ensure that we promote a gender responsive approach to the way in which the transition actually rolls out. And I think, as Fitzroy was saying, in the region in which we come from, in the Asia Pacific, the just transition is going to be a long process, but something that's really critically needs to sort of be happening now. And when we talk about the role of women in the just transition, I think we really, in our region, we have to separate the formal workforce with the informal workforce. So we have about 32% of women as part of the renewable energy sector right now, and the growth globally is expected to be something like 18 million jobs, right, in the RE sector. Women are most likely to be in low-skilled places in those workplaces. I think less than 5% of women hold top jobs, C-suite board roles, CSO, CEO roles. So there's a lot of scope in terms of the formal workforce to be creating decent jobs for women as part of the just transition. But I really think on the other side of it, on the informal workforce, you know, for example, in the Asia Pacific, you're looking at about 60% of all women work in the informal sector. So how is the just transition really ensuring an inclusive process for these women, and how are we creating equitable benefits and opportunities from the just transition? And I think it's a real challenge when so many gender inequalities underpin that societal fabric. So women's lack of access to land tenure, which means they struggle to access financial services and products to increase their uptake of renewable energy or low carbon technologies. There are a lot of systemic gender inequalities that really we need to be looking at the root causes, so that this sort of social transformation that has to come along with the just transition can really happen.
I suppose the question is, how long do we have to look at it before we can come up with a recipe, as it were, to change it? You know what I mean? Because this has been a challenge for such a long time, hasn't it? I mean, is there a country somewhere that you can point to that where you feel at least it's being taken on board? You know, that there should be some proper gender balance in both the formal and informal sectors.
I don't know that I could pinpoint a specific country, but then perhaps maybe I can give you some sort of tangible examples of how, and this is something that, particularly with UN Women, we're really trying to ensure that we do leave no one behind. And I think that's where we're trying to, and we have a program, the Empower Women for Climate Resilient Societies program, that really tries to target women in the most vulnerable areas in the Asia Pacific region, so the most climate vulnerable areas. And we're trying to create financial products and services for renewable energy technologies that meet women where they're at. So whether that be no collateral, first loss guarantees, and working with the financial mechanisms and the institutions to understand the requirements. How can, and I think this really goes part and parcel with the just transition and building climate resilience, because these kinds of renewable energy technologies and low carbon tech, they're a vital lifeline for climate resilience in our region.
Because in a place like Rwanda, for example, you've got some women who are the solar sisters. I don't know if you know those. Who
they're
do
amazing.
their door-to-door selling. So it can be done.
Absolutely,
with the right
it can be done.
Yeah, sorry, Katerina, I'm jumping in here,
That's
but it's
fine.
just
It's absolutely fine. We're like around a campfire here. So Fitria, in terms of all the examples that you pointed out initially, what could we do to mitigate and what are the key steps here that needs to be taken?
Thank you. So I think for now we can say COP29 is one of the key actions that we need to watch together, especially how our world leaders now negotiating to mainstream at least prioritizing the gender and health lens into the climate negotiations. So at the end of the day, we will come up with something like more stronger and more firm into the actions for the climate, which again, for now, we cannot say that climate health is negotiable in this negotiation. It's non-negotiable. So that's why by developing this strong commitment, and then how every government will also commit to develop the climate resilient health system, it's also important to adapt and mitigate all of the impact of the climate change itself. And I understand this will be quite challenging, especially in the global south countries, because again, the economical and then the political situations, and then technology and innovations are still there as the barriers. But again, through this COP, this should be an avenue for everyone to help each other and leaving no one behind, as Amy just mentions. And talking about the health and the gender itself, again, centering this lens will be really helpful to advance how we can try to strengthen the climate resilient health system, which also gender sensitive. And I think I also want to highlight how our the Asia Pacific itself, because I was invited to join the two-day multi-stakeholder dialogue on the gender equality and then climate actions, which held by the UN Women, UNFPA, UNEP, and also ARO. And I found very insightful sessions, which I think everyone really agree that health is non-negotiable, but also including the gender also should be, it's like obligations, and then it is non-negotiable. And in this multi-stakeholder dialogue, I think I can also try to read some of our call to actions, which I think this is really important for everyone to understand and then also to know. We urge we need to have an acceleration on the production and the use of intersectional gender and environment data to strengthen the implementation, monitoring, and accountability of climate action. And the second, we also call for the drive just and inclusive transition to advance gender equality and support women's meaningful engagement in climate action, ensuring so their participation will be equitably and lead and benefits from climate resilient economies. And the third one, we must adopt a right-based and gender-responsive approach to adaptation planning and action to ensure co-benefits of achieving both gender equality and sustainable climate solutions. And then the fourth one, we also urgently call for us to scale up the gender-responsive climate finance that is accessible, inclusive, and accountable. And then the last one, we call for to address the critical interlinkages of climate change, sexual and reproductive health, and gender-based balance in climate plans, policies, and programs. So I think these five call to actions are really the same call to action that the feminist fellow also came here to demand our global leaders to include the gender and also the health into the heart of the climate negotiations now. So I hope this can be taken seriously by our world leaders.
Well, thank you very much, Fitzria and Amy, for sharing your insights here. This is truly inspiring, and it's not the climate that needs to be changed; it's the system, right? Or it's interconnected. Yeah. So let's root for your work and keep at it. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's move on.
So today's broadcast is coming to an end. We'll be back again tomorrow with discussions on how to scale solutions to phase out the fossil fuel economy, how to reduce methane emissions from landfills and waste, part of our Buy More Time campaign, and also one-on-one interviews with special guests and much more.
Before we finish, let's watch some footage from Youth for Climate Action Initiative. They've been filming and talking to interesting people here around the COP today. So let's watch this.
Hello, here Julian from Luxembourg. We are here with 6 people as youth delegation, presenting you every day with a little wrap up from COP29. So Max, what did we learn today?
First, we were in a plenary session with former US Vice President Al Gore, who after losing the 2000 US election to George W. Bush, pivoted his political career to focus on the dangers of climate change. Vice President Gore presented to us his new initiative, Climate Trace, which compiles detailed data concerning where and when climate emissions come from. This is incredibly important because until now, emissions data were based mostly on proxy calculations.
Hi, I'm Radinsa, presenting a very special weather report. Across the globe, from top to bottom, drastic changes are happening. If we don't become vigilant and take action, our lives will soon be in great danger. Let me show you the forecast of 2050. Heat waves will affect 94% of children making playing outside in the past. Scorching weather conditions will destroy many crops, eliminating our favorite food, bread. Disasters will affect almost everything we need. Of course, all of this is by a blanket of heat-trapping pollution in the atmosphere that we would like just not put up there. But don't worry, there's still a chance of clear skies. Right now, clear energy systems are moving in from the east to the west, creating tons of cool jobs. And solar prices have dropped lower than oil and gas. It looks like hybrid systems of cups could still move in and protect kids from an avalanche of really bad stuff. We'll keep you posted as we check if adults stop wasting time and fix this totally solvable problem. Because it's not just a weather report to us, it's our future.
I wanna be cool, it isn't a joke. To walk in the woods, without all the smoke. I love to swim, but not in a flood. We can't grow a crop, down in the mud. I want to be cool and get the job done, so we don't get left out to bake in the sun. Let's plant some trees and make some shade. From the ground up, that's how change is made. I wanna be cool, how about you? Together there's not one single thing that we couldn't do. Take care of the earth and each other too. Working together, we all can be cool. I wanna be cool, it's gotten too hot. I'm joining the movement to save what we've got. So every girl and every boy can live a good, long, healthy life and find some joy. I wanna be cool, how about you? Together there's not one single thing that we couldn't do. Take care of the earth and each other too. Working together, we all can be cool. Leaders, it's time to lead. Listen to your people in need. The whole world is sweating this out. Can't you hear your kids starting to shout?